internal politics.
I do.
I find that, you know, you ask.
Things are going along real well.
You ask. Always ask.
Always ask. Every time.
Things in play. And then
Well,
when the
most
inside
of the
is now
senior
ready,
discounts are
it's been through its elections.
My girlfriend is taking a train up from New York to meet me in Vermont on Saturday. Senior discount. Okay.
Negotiation.
$7.
Good money. So,
Not from New York.
Thank you.
So I said, okay, now I'll buy you a business.
Okay, I think we'll get started. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Michael Kurilla, the Director of the Office of Biodefense Research Affairs at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases at NIH, which has been responsible for the oversight of the federal funds that partially contributed to the construction of this project that we're here to discuss tonight. I'd like to welcome you all to this public meeting. The purpose of this meeting is to listen to your comments on the recently released draft supplementary risk assessment regarding the National Emerging Infectious Diseases Laboratory at Boston University. As you can see from the agenda, we will begin this evening with a very short presentation from Dr. Adi Gunlapalli, which will summarize the methods and approaches that were used towards this risk assessment, as well as highlight the general conclusions in that assessment. Following the presentation, we will begin a public comment portion of the meeting. My colleague, Ryan Baya, will be moderating that session. Ryan will review the rules for commenting when we begin the public comment portion. Before I begin, though, I'd like to emphasize that this meeting has not been structured as a question and answer format. We are here to listen to you. Your comments are a crucial element that allow us to finalize the draft supplementary risk assessment, and we look forward to hearing them as well as any written comments that you have and you may potentially submit following this meeting. Ryan will describe that process and also outline the time frame for receiving comments that will be addressed in the final risk assessment. With that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Adi Gunlapalli, who will be presenting an overview of the risk assessment as well as the results. He is a member of the independent contracting team who conducted this risk assessment. He is an assistant professor at the Department of Internal Medicine, Pathology, and Biomedical Informatics at the University of Utah.
Thank you, Dr. Kurilla, and good evening, everyone. We appreciate the opportunity to present an overview of the risk assessment for National Emerging Infectious Diseases Laboratories and NEDL at this meeting. Okay. The purpose of the risk assessment of NEDL is to estimate the human health risks and impacts to the environment resulting from loss of biological containment from a potential accident or malevolent action, which then would expose laboratory workers and members of the public to pathogens being studied in the lab. The second task was to determine if the risks would be different if the facility were to be at an alternate site. So the risk assessment was designed to address three questions. What could go wrong at the lab? What are the probabilities or the likelihood of those events occurring? And if those events occurred, what would be the consequences? The consequences studied were exposure to pathogens and also infection and fatalities resulting from the pathogens. The risk was addressed at three levels: for laboratory workers, for members of the public, and for the three different sites, namely the urban Biosquare Research Park site, the suburban Tyngsboro, Massachusetts site, and the rural Peterborough, New Hampshire site. So the methods are based on established procedures. The risk assessment used data that were available from the published scientific literature. These data were supplemented with expert judgment as needed, and when the desired data for certain analyses were not directly available from published scientific peer-reviewed literature, assumptions were made using relevant real-world experience, related data, and expert judgment. In all such cases, values were used so as to overestimate the risk and not minimize the likelihood of events occurring or the resultant consequences. 4 essential principles were followed in the context of this risk assessment. Transparency was achieved by providing details of the approach, the assumptions used, the basis for those assumptions, and uncertainties in the available data. The risk assessment used qualitative analyses throughout, and when sufficient data were available, the qualitative analyses were supplemented by quantitative assessments. Clarity was achieved by conveying the methods used and results clearly in the main document while providing technical details in appendices. For consistency, the risk assessment followed established guidance and methods. And for reasonableness, the analysis relied on best available scientific information and was based on realism and real-world experience. 13 representative pathogens were studied. Of these, 7 are classified as BSL-3 and 6 are in the BSL-4 category. From the large number of possibilities of events that could occur at Needle, 4 representative events were chosen that represent the greatest risk in terms of the frequency of occurrence of those events and the consequences. These 4 events are needle stick, which is an example of human error, centrifuge release, which represents equipment failure, an earthquake as an example of a natural disaster, and transportation accidents. The assessment focused on those events that could lead to the greatest consequences. For example, for needle sticks and centrifuge releases, these are undetected and/or unreported events. For each event, the risk assessment analyzed the risk of exposure to pathogen from that event, the subsequent risk of infection from exposure to that pathogen from that event, and finally, resulting fatalities, if any, from those infections. In all cases, the risk refers to a combination of the likelihood of how often the event occurs and the consequences resulting from that event. Oops. This here is an overview of the process that was used to conduct the risk assessment. The first part of the assessment involved the event sequence analyses. As mentioned in the previous slide, a large number of possibilities were considered, then representative events were selected that represent the greatest risk. These were then analyzed in detail to provide estimates of the frequency, number, and extent of exposure to a pathogen from those events. Health effects were the focus of the second part of the assessment. Here, infections and fatalities resulting from exposure to the pathogen from the particular event were analyzed. First, initial infections among those exposed to the pathogen were estimated. For most events, this involved laboratory workers. Then, in certain cases, if the pathogen can be transmitted directly from person to person, the numbers of secondary infections that could potentially occur among the public were estimated using quantitative modeling methods. Finally, the estimates of exposure, infection, and fatalities were combined to characterize the risk associated with needle operations. For this presentation, the results are shown as a combination of the likelihood of that event occurring and the resulting infections as the consequence of that event. This is represented as the risk of infection from exposure to a particular pathogen from a particular event. The first risk consideration are the laboratory workers at Needle. They are considered to be at greatest risk of exposure to and infection from pathogens during needle operations. For example, as a result of a needle stick event that is undetected and/or unreported, the risk of 1 or more infections to a lab worker is estimated to be once in 100 years to once in 10,000 years. This is a broad range, as this includes the risk for all 13 pathogens in the BSL-3 and BSL-4 categories. For a centrifuge event, there were no realistic events identified that would pose a risk from BSL-4 pathogens. The risk of 1 or more infections to lab workers as a result of a centrifuge event that is undetected and/or unreported is considered plausible only for BSL-3 pathogens. The risk is highest for Rift Valley fever virus, with 1 or more infections estimated to occur with an average frequency of once in 100 years. The risk is lowest for Yersinia pestis, the bacteria that causes plague. Here, the risk of one or more infections is estimated to be once in 5 million years. The greatest risk to the public is from close contact with an infected lab worker who has experienced an undetected and/or unreported needle stick injury. The risk of one or more infections among the public from secondary transmission is estimated to occur with an average frequency of less than once in 500 years. The risk is greatest for these 4 pathogens listed: the SARS-associated coronavirus, the 1918 influenza virus, Yersinia pestis, the bacteria that causes plague, and the Ebola virus. The risk of 100 or more infections among the public as a result of this event is estimated to occur with an average frequency of less than once in 1400 years. Here, the risk is greatest for the SARS-associated coronavirus and 1918 influenza virus. There is potential for direct exposure to and infection from pathogen among the public from an earthquake event that's severe enough to demolish the building. Here, the risk of one or more infections is estimated to occur with an average frequency of less than once in 10,000 years to less than 1 in 1 million years. The estimated here range again is broad, as this includes results for all the 13 pathogens, both in the BSL-3 and BSL-4 categories. There also exists the potential for direct exposure to an infection from pathogen among the public from malevolent acts. A number of scenarios were considered and analyzed under this category. None of these scenarios resulted in consequences greater than those estimated from the earthquake scenario that was described in the previous slide. With regard to transportation accidents, needle operations call for special packaging to be used for shipping and receiving pathogens. These packages are expected to withstand any realistic vehicle crash. Therefore, the risk of one or more infections in the public resulting from pathogen release from a transportation accident is estimated to occur with an average frequency of once in more than 1 million years for all the 13 pathogens studied. With regard to site differences, the risk to laboratory workers is estimated to be the same at the urban Biosquare Research Park site, the suburban Tingsboro, Massachusetts site, and the rural Peterborough, New Hampshire site, as needle operations are assumed to be identical at all 3 sites. The risk assessment estimated differences in risk from the earthquake event. This is an estimate of risk of infection from direct release of pathogen from the facility as a result of a massive earthquake. The overall risk of infection among the public from such an event is less than 1 in 1 million years at all 3 sites for 12 of the pathogens studied. There is a difference noted with regard to Rift Valley fever virus. The risk of infection from this pathogen is estimated to be greater at the urban site, and this is estimated to occur with an average frequency of less than 1 in 10,000 years. The greatest risk to the public is from an infected lab worker in whom the infection is either undetected and/or unreported. If this were to occur, the analysis shows that there is no substantial difference in overall secondary infections among the public at the 3 sites. High commuting rates among the 3 sites offset the population differences at the 3 sites. It's important to note that for this analysis, the higher social contact rates were assumed for the urban site as compared to the suburban and rural sites. The risk assessment also addressed aspects of environmental justice. EJ communities were identified near the urban and suburban sites. With regard to risk of direct exposure to pathogen, EJ communities may be exposed as a result of direct release of pathogen from needle due to an earthquake event. This was noted only for the urban site, Biosquare Research Park. As noted earlier, the greatest risk to the public is from secondary transmission of pathogen from close contact with an infected lab worker. The event of exposure of members of the public from an infected lab worker, the likelihood is not based on the location of the facility, rather it's based on the potential that the infected lab worker leaves the facility and transmits the pathogen to close social contacts. In the event that this occurs, secondary transmission of pathogen may occur in EJ communities. However, in both the direct release and infected lab worker scenarios, it's important to note that the risk of exposure to the pathogen is estimated to be similar for all persons at all sites, regardless of their EJ status. Apart from EJ communities, the risk assessment also addressed medically vulnerable subpopulations. For this assessment, 5 categories were analyzed, namely those below age 5, those over age 65, those with diabetes, those with HIV/AIDS, and pregnant women. In looking at the risk of infection and secondary transmission among these groups of people, there were possible differences noted in susceptibility to some pathogens in each medically vulnerable group. At the community level, however, the risk assessment estimated no overall substantial difference in risk among the 3 sites. Asthma was also considered. There were no known associations of asthma with increased susceptibility to infections from pathogens studied in this risk assessment. So, in summary, the risk assessment was conducted using established methods. Available data were used, and when the desired data for certain analyses were not directly available from published scientific peer-reviewed literature, assumptions were made using relevant real-world experience, related data, and expert judgment. In all such cases, values were used so as to overestimate the risk and not minimize the likelihood of events occurring and resultant consequences. The lab workers are considered to have the greatest risk from needle operations. The greatest risk to the public is from secondary transmission infections from close contact with an infected lab worker. Overall, no substantial risk differences were identified at 3 alternative sites. The risk assessment can be viewed and downloaded from this website. Written comments on the risk assessment may be sent by email to this email address listed here, or by regular mail to the postal address listed here. Thank you again for the opportunity to present an overview of the risk assessment. Good evening.
Thank you, Adi. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ryan Beha. I am with the NIH Office of Biotechnology Activities, and I will be moderating this public comment session. As Adi just mentioned, and as you see behind me, there's a slide up on the screen that shows the mailing address, email address, and telephone number for our office. You can use this information to either request a copy of the draft supplementary risk assessment with Reader's Guide, or to submit your comments on the draft supplementary risk assessment. As a reminder to everyone in the room, the end of the public comment period is May 1st, 2012. For your convenience, so you're not trying to scratch this address down while I'm talking, we're going to leave this slide up for the remainder of the evening. Before we begin with the public comment portion of our meeting, I'd like to briefly go over how the session will run. Prior to the beginning of this meeting, there was a commenter sign-up sheet in the registration area. If you have not signed up to speak but wish to, please do so now. For those who have already signed up, I will call 4 names at a time. When you hear your name called, please proceed to the microphone closest to your seat. Some other information that you are going to want to know: these proceedings are being videotaped, and a written transcript of everything said is being recorded. We do have a fair number of people that have signed up to speak, so I request that you limit your comments to no longer than 3 minutes, so that everyone here who wishes to speak has the opportunity. I'll be keeping track of the time up here, and I will alert you when the 3 minutes have passed. I respectfully ask that you adhere to this 3-minute limit so that all of your neighbors have an opportunity to be heard. If we do reach the end of the sign-up list, and there is still time remaining, we will give those individuals who wish for more time an additional 3 minutes. That's time permitting. Finally, before we get started, I just wanted to reiterate, as Dr. Kurilla noted earlier, that this meeting is not structured in a question and answer format, and NIH is here tonight to listen carefully to all of your comments. All of the comments you give, either through oral testimony here or any comments submitted to our offices, will each receive a response in the final supplementary risk assessment. With that out of the way, we can now begin the public comment session. I want to apologize in advance if I mispronounce anyone's name. I have a last name that is somewhat strange to pronounce as well, and I know how frustrating it can be, so I do apologize in advance, but I will do my best. I ask that the following people proceed to the microphone nearest their seat: Kevin Norton, Laura Maslow-Armand, Jennifer Rushlow, and Tia Paneth. Kevin Norton.
Excuse me, I just want to say welcome to everyone that is here. My name is Claire Allen. I'm the community organizer for the Roxbury Station. I just want to say thank you very much for coming out. And I know the presentation might have been a little complicated, but be glad that you didn't have to go through this document right here, the 1700 page, to figure out what was going on. I just want to let folks know that this has been a very long issue. We've been working very hard on it. They still haven't been beat. NIH and Tetra Tech have not been able to prove our question from the beginning. If something were to release, what is going to happen? So we haven't gotten that in the risk assessment. I want people to know that you do not have to be a scientist in order to speak tonight. A lot of technical stuff was up here, but still, we have concern about transportation. We have concern about releases. We have concern about evacuation. We have concerns about different things. So let the scientists handle the science. And residents, speak up. Speak out. Let them know that this is not fair, and we don't want this thing in our community. They have not proved that it is safe for it to be in our community, and we won't stand for it to be in our community.
Mr. Norton.
My name is Kevin Norton, and I would like to go on record as saying I feel the facility has the potential to do life-saving research, and therefore I am in favor of it. Thank you.
Laura Maslow-Armand.
Hello, I'm a staff attorney at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice, and I represent, with others, the plaintiffs in the federal and state cases. I have 3 quick points: bad faith, environmental racism, and civil rights violations. Bad faith. This is an after-the-fact risk assessment. It was not a risk assessment of the possibilities to this community before the building was built or the grant was allowed. The problem here is that the uncertainty in that 1,700-page document is tucked away. It's disguised as expert opinion when there's lack of knowledge. And something that defies reason is the alternative, is the comparison of sites, Boston or Tingsboro or Peterborough. How could anybody think it's safer to have a building working on select agents in downtown Boston with a population density of 12,200 per square mile as opposed to Tingsboro or Peterborough? And NIH thought this also, because when the BSL-4 was built in Hamilton, Montana, where you have a population density of 1,000 per square mile, they said that's perfect because if there should be an escape or an accident, there would not be a public health disaster. Second point, environmental racism. President Clinton signed an executive order, 1994, condemning the environmental racism of the past. This is a throwback. The community was not consulted, has not been informed, their opinions are not taken into account. This is just like it used to be, dump it in Dixie or just dump it on the poor, nobody cares, they were not consulted, and this sham of a community liaison committee that BU has created, which does not include any public participation, is simply further proof that there is no community dialogue in violation of NEPA as well. And finally, let's look at the population in which this is located, and I'll be finished quickly. To say there's an equal risk of exposure is one thing, but what about the consequences of exposure? This community in which the building is located has 40% at least living below the poverty line. They have the highest rate of all Boston neighborhoods of diabetes hospitalization, heart disease hospitalization, tuberculosis rates, and infant mortality. It's not a community that is equivalent to the community that would be in Tingsboro or Peterborough. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Rushlow?
Thank you. I'm Jennifer Rushlow. I'm an attorney with the Conservation Law Foundation. I'd like to start out by pointing out that there are a number of elected officials in the room that have not been acknowledged yet tonight. If they could all stand up so we could thank them for attending. Gloria Fox, Tito Jackson, Sonia Chang Diaz is here, Brendan Rushing as well.
Let me just say this, that my position on this project has not changed. I'm State Representative Gloria Fox, and I would be against then and now a level 4 biolab built in the heart and soul and the most densely populated part of the city of Boston, endangering not just the communities of color, but the entire city. So we still have, they have not proven that our concerns have been or would be resolved. So we have to really continue to stretch.
Thank you, Rep. Fox.
You're welcome.
Overall,
time over.
Thank you. Overall, I'm greatly concerned by the shortcomings of the draft risk assessment. NIH is required by law to evaluate the risks associated with this facility. There are dozens, if not hundreds of places in the 1,700 plus pages that NIH reaches the conclusion that there is insufficient data to determine the risks associated with a particular pathogen or how a pathogen might affect medically vulnerable subpopulations such as the EJ community in Roxbury. And by EJ, I mean environmental justice. In other words, NIH has admitted that it doesn't know what the risks are. So my message to the agency is this. If this is the best you can do, then this draft risk assessment has made one thing extremely clear. The needle must not operate in this location. NIH must accept that it cannot make an environmental justice community the site of its experiments with risks that we can't even quantify. That being said, I'd like to offer a few specific comments on Chapter 3 of the draft risk assessment, which deals with pathogens. First, this chapter focuses on 7 BSL-3 and 6 BSL-4 pathogens. This list is described as representative. In other words, you have not committed to limit your research to the pathogens on this list. Other pathogens that are not addressed in this risk assessment will be tested in the needle if it's allowed to proceed. EIRs and EISs pursuant to NEPA and MEPA can't just skip over significant aspects of a project. The risk analysis for a project of this scope and impact must be comprehensive, and an incomplete list of pathogens won't do. Second, in many areas of this chapter, you state that there are no published reports regarding transmissibility or effects of a given pathogen in medically vulnerable subpopulations. And you leave it there. You make no attempt to draw inferences from similar diseases or knowledge of the effects of known symptoms on those subpopulations. For example, in the discussion of SARS, you say that there are no published studies on SARS's differential impacts on lower socioeconomic groups. Yet, we've seen it transmit rapidly in several low socioeconomic areas of the world. To drop the analysis on the basis that you couldn't find any published studies is irresponsible in light of the real-world information that we all have. In the section about the Nipah virus, this section concludes with a statement that the possibility of transmission is low because it requires, and I quote, close contact that may be culture and region specific. Yet the risk assessment includes no analysis as to how families in Roxbury or the South End might share the cultural characteristics of communities afflicted by the virus, for instance, large households or cultural practices that could encourage close contact. These are just a few of the examples of the ways in which the draft risk assessment starts to characterize the specific risks of siting the needle in Boston, but then drops the ball and leaves the analysis incomplete. Ultimately, under NEPA, the purpose of this risk assessment is to help you decide whether the risks of going forward with this project are justifiable. NIH is supposed to be the ultimate force in protecting America's health. Citing a facility with risks that are clearly unknown in a medically vulnerable community is hardly a protective action. This draft risk assessment tells you everything you need to know, which is that it's not safe to proceed here. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Paneth?
Hi, I'm Thea Paneth. I'm from the town of Arlington, Massachusetts. A few of us are here tonight. We live within the 10-mile disaster zone, and we came out here to Roxbury Community College to stand in solidarity with the people of this community. Several years ago, without any hesitation at all, our Board of Selectmen voted to oppose this lab in the middle of Boston. This lab is a misuse of power. It's a misuse of science and knowledge, and the doctors associated with it should be ashamed of yourselves. There's nothing biodefense about this facility. It is a biological warfare production facility. And it should not proceed. So we think science, knowledge, and power should be used to solve the real problems that people face. Economic injustice, climate change, etc. That's all.
The next four names are Donovan Walker, Sandy Eaton, Vicki Steinitz, and David Mundell.
Good evening, community. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
I want to thank you for giving me the consideration. Basically, I just want to give a little history. I know I have 3 minutes, want to do it real fast. The birth of this thing came from President George Bush, $6.2 billion infusion into making sure that there were 3 level 4 developed buildings built. Boston University applied with a 1,500-page application and was successful in being one of the 3 teams picked. Subsequently, we, the community, stepped up, and one of the things that I want to point out is that the mayor does not have any power if this place is implemented. All responsibilities and first call goes to the governor, then to the president's office. If this level 4 is opened up, it's managed by Boston University, but it's controlled by the federal government, Department of Development, Department of Defense, and the CDC. Anyone also with enough money to rent enough space and time that they want to do their research can get in there. So the opportunity for individuals with negative indiscretions towards anyone and everyone is there. I think we, the people, feel that the place is not right and the impact would not be right. And it's too close. Our primary hospital, Boston City Hospital, is in the quarantine zone. If anything happens within that area, within a mile area, everything would be quarantined. That means you would not be allowed to leave. You would not be able to jump on the expressway. That would be locked down. If you ask to see the mandated plans of security, they shut down the expressway all the way in Quincy and towards Malden, if I'm not correct, in Medford. So we will not be able to leave if this thing is implemented in our community. One of the things I want to let everybody know is this. There was $220 million spent to build this. $60 to $70 million is provided every year for 20 years. And there was not $1 considered for the first responders, city, Boston police, fire, or anything else socially applicable to responding to a negative situation. I don't think anybody thought about us, and I don't think we should think about them. The Developmental Neighborhood Coalition votes to reject the Level 4 proposition. God bless you.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to point out that there are other elected officials here, and I'd like to yield to them if they want to say a word at this time. There's Senator Chang Diaz and Councilor Jackson, at least I know, are here. I don't know if there are others. Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Byron Rushing also.
Thank you, sir. My name is Tito Jackson. I'm the city councilor for District 7, and I stand with my community in defense of my community against this project. It is very simple. Our community will no longer get dumped on. We have an expressway. We have all of the transfer that occurs in a city in that area, and we also have a prison. We do not need Ebola or any other potentially airborne or non-airborne agents in our community. In addition, within a mile, and as Mr. Walker brought up, within a mile of that area is the largest and busiest bus terminal in the state of Massachusetts in Dudley Station, with over 35,000 riders who move through there every single day. It scares me beyond no end, and I went through the tour, and the tour scared me even more because I saw folks who were in suits, and even if they had a heart attack, they would still have to go through the decontamination unit, even if they were in medical distress. Those are not the type of agents that we need, want, or desire in our community. And with the amount of money that was spent here, we're not going to see the downflow of jobs that we would normally see from a $200 million facility. So I stand and I represent 72,000 people in District 7, and I am not for this. It's something that our community does not need. We need opportunities, but this is not an opportunity. This is dumping on our community. Thank you.
I'll be just very brief because I'm here primarily to listen, and I really want to thank all of the community members who did come out tonight. And I also do want to thank the NIH for, although there's only one hearing, for making it at a location that is in the neighborhood and accessible to the neighborhoods and in the evening. As I have expressed before, I have grave misgivings, obviously, about this location, first and foremost on an environmental justice basis. But I did want to just confirm something that I heard you say earlier, sir, which is that although this is not structured as a question and answer session tonight, that every question that any individual submits to the NIH will receive an answer in the final report. Was I correct in hearing you say that? Thank you for making that pledge, and I think that's going to be a critical pledge because there remain a lot of unanswered questions for the community. And I would just like to log one question in particular. In addition to the concern that the attorney from CLF expressed earlier about all of the places in the report that say that insufficient data was available, I also have a question about the assumption put forth in the report that the life of this facility would be 50 years and would not be expected to stay in the community past a 50-year lifespan. And I'm wondering how that number was arrived at and why 50 years. Thank you.
Could you state your name for the record,
Yes,
please?
sorry. Again, my name is Sonia Chang Diaz, and I represent the 2nd Suffolk District.
Thank you very much. Mr. Eaton?
Thank you very much. My name is Sandy Eaton. I retired in January after 48 years working at the bedside in a variety of facilities. Most of that time it was as a critical care registered nurse. I want to speak particularly to concerns raised by my clinical colleagues regarding what they are expected to do if there is a breach. particularly the nurses and their colleagues at Boston Medical Center, with whom I've had dialogue throughout this whole process. They are very concerned that there has been no education, no training. The physical facilities are not adequate, with only 2 negative pressure rooms on each unit, meaning no more than 20 in the whole facility, and the fact that the institution is going through one reduction in force after another, and the churn of personnel, which make education and preparation even worse. I can think of 3 possible scenarios that were touched on in the report, but I want to bring them out particularly from a clinician's point of view. If there's a known accidental breach, back in December of 2004, when we in the Massachusetts Nurses Association realized that the Bush administration and BU were planning to site a level 4 bioterror lab in the middle of Gridlock City, we had great concerns. We summoned the folks from BU and invited the folks from the Roxbury Safety Net to come to our headquarters in Canton. We intended to have everybody in the room so we could have an intense dialogue and real-time exchange of facts and opinions and ideas among everyone present. The folks from BU refused to be in the same room with the Roxbury folks, and we thought that was very inappropriate and set the tone for our whole approach going forward. In January of 2005, we passed a very strong resolution opposing the siting of this lab in this community at this time and raising questions about the validity of the whole program nationally and globally. And in that presentation in December of 2004, the folks from BU, among other things, showed us slides of what looked like a $100,000 coffin on wheels, that if there was a known breach affecting a worker within the plant, within the facility, that would be put into that and presumably wheeled down Albany Street to the emergency department at Boston Medical Center. Well, what the heck are the nurses supposed to do then? The second scenario is if there's an accidental breach that isn't known, a needle stick or whatever, and someone goes out into the community and subsequently folks show up sick. Fever of unknown origin is a very frequent diagnosis. What do? Our courageous colleagues in Toronto several years ago, many of whom died, were faced with the SARS epidemic. They used universal precautions as they were supposed to. They did the right thing to their knowledge, and it took a while to bring that under control. And the third and scariest scenario, it would be of a deliberate, malicious breach by an individual or group, even with suicide as being a potential vehicle for carrying out a breach. I don't think that is adequately addressed. The document is over 1,700 pages long. I have it in my iPad. I've looked at it frequently. I've tried to get through it as much as I can. And I'm only a college graduate, so I don't read, my reading comprehension isn't quite up to par. I could get from the front to the back of the Bible more easily and quickly than I can through this 1,700-page document. So I just don't know, that. There are a couple of other scenarios. We are situated on the largest earthquake fault on the East Coast. Does anybody realize that? Yes. We also, the lab is also situated near the apex of a funnel of the Fort Point Channel through on a floodplain through Lower Roxbury and Back Bay. They don't call it the Back Bay for nothing. So there's water or tsunami as a possible situation also. So anyway, M&A took this position a long time ago. We haven't changed that position. We've attended every possible hearing and studied every possible aspect of this. And our opposition has maintained itself. And I have to say this, as someone who's been a practitioner at the bedside in all kinds of scary situations, starting from the beginning of the HIV epidemic, I am not afraid of germs. I am afraid of arrogant bureaucrats. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Steinitz?
I'm one of the coordinators coordinators of Cambridge United for Justice with Peace, and we've been involved in this struggle since the beginning. The reason why we've been involved in this struggle is that we saw this as an example of the war at home. We're not just concerned about wars abroad, we're also concerned about the wars at home and wars perpetuated on low-income communities, like the community where this lab is proposed to be sited. Also, the dual impact of the pathogens that are going to be studied. We're told over and over again that it's illegal to do offensive research in this country, but we also know that the United States has really not been a party to signing off on international treaties about biological weapons. So we're concerned about that. I think that history is important here. This is a 10-year history of the struggle against this lab. And the reasons why there's so much suspicion and so much distrust have a lot to do with that history. And I think the distrust is about the neutrality of NIH in this process. NIH is going to be judging the results. As part of the NEPA process, they will be judging whether this risk assessment is adequate. At the same time, they've been coaching Tetra Tech for the last couple of years with blue ribbon panels and the NRC. So we really worry about this being a done deal, or the effort is to make this seem as a done deal. A few specific comments relevant to that. Jenny talked about the 13 pathogens selected for study. In the 1,700-page document, there are a lot of claims made about community involvement in the process, a list of all the meetings that the community was invited to. Well, I happened to be at the one where the pathogens were being discussed, and it was in the basement of a Roxbury church, and we were presented with the task of deciding which pathogens we in the community wanted studied. That was the assigned task. Well, nobody in the room wanted any pathogens to be studied, and this has been counted as community involvement in the process of selecting those pathogens. A question that we have, and Jenny raised it as well, is what happens if some other pathogens are researched? Will there be a risk assessment to decide whether they are problematic? Will we be told? Transparency was on the list of the 4 criteria by which this risk assessment was done, but we still have no idea of what the plans are for research in this laboratory. We don't know what will be studied, by whom, et cetera. Another specific point that I want to raise is about some of the comments. The NRC, National Research Council panel, which advised at a number of points, wrote a letter raising some questions about the 90% risk assessment, which is the 1,700 pages, maybe 2,000 by the time it becomes 100%. And one of the things that is said throughout the document is that every estimate is a conservative one. Yet, the NRC letter suggests that the number of needle sticks is a low estimate. It's not a conservative estimate. This has not been addressed in the document thus far. And this, given that needle sticks are the largest frequency of possible negative events, seems to be rather critical. Similarly, and here's something which I've learned, I'm not a scientist, I'm a social scientist, I'm a psychologist, but I've learned a lot about biology through these years. But one of the things that gets talked about a lot is the fomite carryout risk. So what are fomites? I Googled it last night and discovered that fomites are the surfaces on which infectious diseases, pathogens can be settled. Lab instruments, lab coats, and the concern is about the fact that in this risk assessment, there's been no independent analysis of the risk of fomites carrying out pathogens out of the lab and what would happen to those.
Ma'am, I respectfully request that you wrap up your comments.
Okay. Just another point that I want to raise. Biological pathogens are different. They're living organisms with no shelf life. They reproduce and they mutate, often in unexpected ways. No governmental agency regulates or enforces worker or public exposure to biological agents. This lack of oversight and the lack of uniform regulations of biological agents in particular is very worrisome to all of us. We worry about worker infections and are skeptical of the oft-repeated claim that secondary transmissions are so unlikely as not to be worth consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Mundell?
My name is David Bundell. I'm a resident of the South End, and I've been working on this since 2004. I did have gray hair when it started. I have not read either the Old or New Testament in its entirety, but I have read all 1,700 pages twice. And the Reader's Guide, although we were urged not to comment on it. The NRC letter, I've listened to all of the sessions with the NRC, and I have some comments about the risk assessment itself. My colleagues, my friends, the elected representatives have spoken about why this lab should not be. Let me just talk about the risk assessment, the 1,700 pages that I've read. And I do want to apologize. My mom told me throughout my life that if I didn't have something nice to say, I ought not to say it. But those of you who know me are, I'm sure, understand I didn't always follow my mother's advice, okay? And I want to deal with 3 important flaws in the risk assessment, and I advised the representative from Tetra Tech that I would talk about these flaws. First, this is not an assessment of the risk of the lab. The risk of operating the lab is the combination of all of the possible events from all of the possible agents or pathogens. This is an analysis of a supposedly representative subset of events and subset of pathogens. It is not an analysis of the risk of this lab. Second, with regard to the text of the 1,700 pages, the current draft and the companion reader's guide are subtly and dangerously biased. They are not, if this is what is meant by transparency, you have failed transparency. In many instances, the positive views are placed early in the paragraphs, where someone who doesn't want to read the entire paragraph can then skim to the next. Sections with negative views, sections with qualifiers are put later. In fact, the summary from Adi this evening never used the word uncertainty. Never used the word uncertainty, either verbally or in the text of the slides. With regard to the exclusion of asthmatics, now, again, my mom was an asthmatic, so I lived through that. The reason asthmatics were not studied, was because there was no known association. There are no known associations for almost 900% of the events in this lab. In fact, on page I-3, if I'm correct, it does say, although there are no known associations of susceptibility, the asthmatics are likely to be more seriously affected by the organisms that affect the lung functions. This is bias. And third, there is no clear, accessible, and accurate summary. The NRC said there should be a summary. The Blue Ribbon Panel said there should be a summary. There should be a summary of the entirety, and there should be a summary of the individual sections. The only part which appears to present a summary is the so-called Reader's Guide, which we were directed purposefully, I would say, not to comment on. Frankly, I think there is a reason why we were asked not to comment on the Reader's Guide. Because the Reader's Guide is a biased, incomplete, and inaccurate summary. It is transparent in its avoidance of mentioning uncertainty other than one mention of some uncertainty. This document is not a qualified, adequate risk assessment. It is better than the other ones, but that is faint praise given the inadequacies of the previous risk assessments. I suggest that this risk assessment doesn't have 10% more work to be done. This risk assessment needs to be revised, it needs to be a complete assessment, and it needs to be an unbiased, accurate assessment of the potential risk associated with this lab.
I respectfully ask you to wrap up your comments.
I respectfully will do so. Okay? In an attempt to be helpful with regard to the summary, I wrote down a summary. Quote, based on available evidence and insights, it is difficult to adequately or accurately predict the level of risks potentially associated with the proposed facility. Close quote. That one sentence is in fact a summary of the 1,700 pages. And I guess I would always add another one. I'd say, quote, although it is unclear whether these risks are likely to be large, moderate, or small, it is very clear we do not now have the data or understanding that allows us to predict them adequately. Close quote. If this risk assessment were presented to the community before this lab was built, it would never have been built. Therefore, the high containment labs ought never to be allowed to operate. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next four speakers, Lynn Klotz, Christine Griffin, Mina Macorius, Richard Draria.
My name is Lynn Klotz. I'm a senior science fellow at the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation in Washington, D.C., and also a member of their scientists' working group on chemical and biological weapons. By training, I have an undergraduate degree in mathematics, a PhD in chemical physics and in physical biochemistry. And I know a fair amount about infectious disease because of my biosecurity work. First thing I want to say is NIH must not like you very much, putting you up there as the target of all our anger. But there you are. So,
they thought I had the best smile.
Anyway, when I started reading this risk assessment, I'm going to bore in on one thing here. It's just SARS. When I started reading the risk assessment, I was surprised to find out that the risk assessment uses the same hypothetical calculations to calculate the risk of SARS that it did in the 2010 risk assessment. And this was despite the fact that the NRC wrote a scathing criticism of the 2010 risk assessment. And one of the things they focused in on was the fact that that risk assessment totally ignored 3 SARS escapes from laboratories, from VSL-3 laboratories. So I expected to see in the calculations of the risk assessment the actual use of that data, which they didn't use. So as a mathematician, I went ahead and did my own risk assessment based on those 3 escapes. And to get a probability of escape in each lab per year, I found out roughly how many labs have been working on SARS, live SARS, over the last 7 years. And you add all that up and you divide that into the number of 3 escapes, you get a probability of an escape in a single year in a single lab. Now, the only reason I'm saying this is, as I'm sure the people from Tetra Tech know, once you have that, there are all kinds of things you can calculate if you have the probability. So I went ahead and said, okay, given the 50-year lifetime of this facility, which Tetra Tech uses and has also been used for the NBAF and other facilities, I asked myself, with my probability of escape in 1 year, what is the probability of escape in the 50-year lifetime of this facility? So I found out there's a 50% probability of escape and about a 20 of at least one escape and 20-some% probability of at least one escape with secondary infections. Well, why is that important? SARS, I think, has tremendous pandemic potential. Just to give one example, there was one woman during the one natural outbreak in 2003. Woman was infected. She flew from Hong Kong to Toronto. And in Toronto, even though they knew about SARS in Hong Kong at that time, in Toronto she seeded 400 and some infections and 40 deaths. So SARS can kill. Does it have pandemic potential? Well, I compared it with the 1918 pandemic flu virus, and if you look at the so-called reproduction number, in other words, the number of victims that a single infected person can infect, SARS and the 1918 pandemic flu are about the same. But SARS in some ways is worse than the 1918 pandemic flu because the 1918 pandemic flu only killed between 2 and 2.5% of its victims. SARS kills closer to 10%. So SARS, in my mind, has as much potential for a pandemic. Well, if you know you're working with something with a pandemic potential, and all the people who work on SARS, I'm sure the risk analysis here was just based on BSL-3 labs, you ask yourself, well, how big can a pandemic be? Well, the 1918 pandemic flu was 40 million people that was assumed died. So I just took, to be conservative, 10 million people. Then I asked myself a question, and the mathematicians and scientists in the room understand what this is what is the likelihood weighted number of victims and number of deaths? So this facility, if they end up researching SARS, if the needle ends up researching SARS, has a likelihood weighted number of fatalities over its 50-year life of something like 20,000 victims and over 2,000 deaths. That's much too high for any facility. And even though they dismiss a pandemic, I won't read the quote, in the risk assessment, clearly the pandemic potential is there. And I just said, well, let's suppose only 1 in 1,000 escapes with secondary infections would lead to a pandemic. Now this part is pure speculation because nobody really knows. But my intuition tells me if we had 1,000 escapes from SARS from different laboratories, that one of them would result in a pandemic. So my bottom line on all this is no SARS research in BSL-3 or BSL-4. I think all the safety that is touted in BSL-4s isn't exactly right. There have been 3 escapes from BSL-4s, and NIAID has missed one. There was a 1990 escape in Russia that they missed, where the worker went out of the lab. So BSL-4 labs aren't as safe, and I think to work on these things, we have to take the same kind of precautions that we do with smallpox, which is worked on only in 2 facilities in the world by international regulation, and those 2 facilities do it in BSL-4. Smallpox is not as dangerous in developed countries because there's a vaccine. There's no vaccine, no antiviral for SARS. SARS, to me, is a big danger, as is 1918 pandemic flu, and also the potentially contagious and human Asian bird flu virus. I would say those 3 should not be worked on in any BSL-3 or BSL facility without even additional precautions, which I won't get into today, but I'll send my whole analysis and everything to the Blue Ribbon.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Griffin, to accommodate the council member schedule, would you mind if he went before you? Or
I would be delighted to yield to the council member.
Council member Yancey?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will be very, very brief. First of all, I just want to be very clear and unequivocal that I stand with the people of Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, South End, and Greater Boston area in opposing the operation of Level 4 Biolab here in the city of Boston. And I oppose it because over the past 7 years of my 29 years on the Boston City Council, we've held a series of hearings and informational sessions at Boston City Hall. And I did testify back in October 23rd of 2006, when NIH convened a so-called community meeting to get some input. And my position, unfortunately, hasn't changed over the years and over the actual construction of the facility. Because a basic question I have to answer. As a member of the Boston City Council, where I am responsible for the lives of visitors and residents of Boston, is this: if, for whatever reason, one of these pathogens were to be released, what is the city's response? And I've interviewed police commissioners, fire commissioners, and commissioners of public health. And none of those individuals were able to convince me that the city of Boston is prepared to respond to that emergency. I've asked our firefighters directly, are they prepared to deal with that type of emergency? And they candidly had to tell me they haven't even been trained yet. I've asked our police officers, what would our response be? And they had no answers. So when the Public Health Commission came before our committees, I naively thought, 7 years ago, that the response will be an evacuation plan. Well, I learned very rapidly, as everyone here knows, that were released to take place in the city of Boston, this densely populated area, there would not just be a response from city government or state government, but according to the Public Health Commission, it may well be a response from the United States military instituting a quarantine. The risks are far too great. The rewards are doubtful and dangerous, and I can't understand why the United States agency will select a densely populated area like Boston, particularly this section of Boston, adjacent to hospitals and hundreds of thousands of residents. Why do it here? I said, don't do it here. Use that facility for some other purpose, and I go on record as being opposed to the level 4 biolab. And thank you so much for your
Good evening. My name is Christine Griffin. I'm one of the attorneys representing the community members in the federal and the state litigation, and I work at Anderson and Krieger in Cambridge. And I specifically want to address the alternatives analysis that's been included in the risk assessment. The risk assessment aggressively attacks this question as one of the focuses of its analysis. It announces in the opening chapters that it will be one of the focuses. It was the focus of one of the slides that was presented this evening. And unfortunately, although there are a lot of conclusory statements made in the risk assessment about the alternatives analysis, there is not a lot of actual analysis provided in that document. As a number of people have noted, there are other locations that are possible places where BU could locate this lab, a suburban location and a rural location, Tingsboro and Peterborough, New Hampshire. Beyond those locations, there are a million other locations where this lab could also be located. But focusing just on those three, it's important to look behind the conclusory statements that are made throughout the risk assessment about the fact that they've considered whether or not the different locations have an impact, and they've looked at the math, and in fact, the different locations would not have an impact. Whatever math or analysis they're relying on to reach those conclusory statements is not provided in the risk assessment, and if that math has been done, if there's data that they're relying on, that data needs to be provided in much more specificity. Part of the problem in reaching these statements is that the biolab has been built, and as a number of people have pointed out, we're here discussing whether or not it is safe to build a building that is already sitting several blocks away fully built. And therefore, the fact of the building as it exists is incorporated as an assumption into the entire risk assessment. If you were to build a level 4 biolab in a suburban location or a rural location, there's no reason to believe that the building would even look exactly the same as it looks sitting in Boston. The building sitting in Boston as it was built to be on that site. It is a tall building with a narrow footprint. If you were located in a rural location, it would probably be a much lower story building with a broader footprint. It would present a different target for malevolent attacks if it were located in a different location. Unfortunately, it is far more likely that a building located in a dense suburban area that has a tall, highly visible frame, in a dense urban area that has a tall, highly visible frame would be the subject of a malevolent attack than a building located in a rural location. There's also a lot of discussion in the risk assessment about the fact that the percentages of people who have susceptible immune systems or who fall into communities and populations that are more at risk is the same percentage of the population that it would be in many other locations. But the risk assessment plays a little bit fast in use with its terms using percentages and actual numbers. Obviously, even if the percentage is the same here as it would be in another location, the number of people who would be affected is much higher because the population is much denser. So the risk assessment also needs to take into account how many people would be impacted, not just the percentage of people who would be impacted. Another issue that the risk assessment repeatedly says that it has considered is the nature of the commute and the traffic patterns surrounding the location. At this point, there are people who are actually employed by Boston University who work in the biolab on the lower level BSL pathogens. We have actual data that could be collected about where those people commute from, what modes of transportation they take. It doesn't appear that any of that actual data was considered in calculating whether or not the surrounding community would be more likely to be affected in this urban location. I mean, the fact of the matter is that Boston is an old city with old infrastructure. There are bridges and tunnels. There's tremendous traffic gridlock. A lot of people commute to and from work on public transportation. Those characteristics of the city of Boston are different not just from an urban or a suburban location, but they are also different from many other urban locations that you could have chosen to locate this lab. These aspects of the location also impact the transport of the pathogens and the emergency response to any accident that would take place at the biolab. So in closing, I would urge NIH in editing the risk assessment to provide us with much more data and a much more rigorous analysis of why this urban location is, in NIH's eyes, no more dangerous than any other location, because this is a unique space, and it does not appear to this community that they've properly evaluated this unique location.
Thank you. Mina Macorius?
My name is Mina Macarius. I represent, it's all right, it's not the first time that's happened. Along with Christine Griffin, I represent the plaintiffs in the federal and state lawsuits involving the biolab. I want to start by noting that the RA refers to public input dating back to 2004 throughout the document. It's not clear, however, what this public input includes or how it informed the analysis, which is a key point to considering the public input. Details as to how the RA evolved as a result or how it was influenced by the public comment would not only have been helpful, but would be essential to know that the comments were listened to. An appendix containing prior public comments could have been considered or should be considered in the future. In addition, the plaintiffs and other members of the Roxbury and South End communities have raised serious concerns with the openness and transparency of the community input process throughout this time, between 2004 and now. These include the inaccessibility of NIH meetings and materials and the community's interaction with the CLC, which has been referenced before tonight. In addition, the chart in the risk assessment of public involvement opportunities included several meetings held in Bethesda, Maryland, where it would be very difficult for many members of this community to travel to on a regular basis. These were not accessible to members of the Boston communities. The materials from these meetings were not accessible in advance in most cases, and in some cases even the telecast was difficult to access for those who had computer access to begin with. Further, the brief descriptions in the risk assessment of public input include things such as, quote, members attended and provided comments on, and then in parentheses, the subject of the meeting. This does not capture what influence, if any, the public involvement has had on this risk assessment or the previous risk assessments. So to phrase some of the concerns that have been raised in the past. One, although NIH and BU have been urged by members of the Boston community and the state court to focus on specific sites at issue, very little of the risk assessment actually does focus on the placement of the needle within Boston or the two alternative sites, as my colleague just mentioned. Instead, the bulk of the risk assessment draws on generic medical and sociological data without analyzing specific social patterns, commuting patterns, or frankly, any other population characteristics aside from the medically vulnerable subpopulations within the potentially affected communities. Second, there's been a lot of mention of the potential for creating jobs, and yet within the categories of potentially exposed populations, there's the category of laboratory worker, which is used to describe scientists and lab technicians who are likely to have received some training in the safe handling of pathogens, and a separate category of facility workers, which is assumed to include only administrative staff with no access to laboratories. This categorization fails to include maintenance staff, janitorial staff, or any other staff that may enter laboratory spaces on a regular basis, especially at times when other lab workers are not there. This omission is especially problematic given the fact that such workers are more likely to live in environmental justice communities and more likely to commute using public transportation given their socioeconomic status. Second, the risk assessment references the conclusion of a blue ribbon panel on bioterrorism and its implications for biomedical research as one of the reasons for the need for the lab. That panel was convened in 2002. We all remember that the world was a very different place in 2002. And at that point, that analysis said that an insufficient amount of BSL-3 and BSL-4 space existed to protect the United States from bioterrorist attack. That conclusion, even if accurate, is outdated. The risk assessment does not include an up-to-date statement of the need for additional BSL-3 or BSL-4 space that takes into account the advances in scientific research, the changing nature of terrorism risks, and the proliferation of high-level labs since that time. Finally, I'd like to focus on something that has been brought up a few times, which is the way the risk assessment handles the risks of malevolent attacks. The risk assessment assumes that risks caused by malevolent attacks can be analyzed through comparison to earthquake risks and other natural disasters. This is unpersuasive. Malevolent attacks would target the needle. They would be intentionally targeted at the needle or specific populations. Earthquakes don't do that. In addition, some risks that would be created by malevolent attacks that don't include the release of pathogens, such as fire, building collapse, or violence used to obtain pathogens, are not discussed at all. In fact, fire is used as a great fact that may allow some pathogens to be killed off. These are unlikely to occur in an area absent the placement of a target for malevolent attacks. And that analysis hasn't been studied for any of the sites, whether the urban, rural, or suburban sites. Thus, the additional risks of these other non-biological risks should be analyzed and should be presented to the public so that a full assessment of the risks can be given, as Mr. Mendel pointed earlier, not just a piecemeal assessment of different risks. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Jaria?
Excuse my back, Ryan, but I'm going to address the people who matter here. My name is Richard Arario. I live on the Fenway, just a 10-minute walk on the other side of the tracks. I've lived there for 40 years. I've gone to every one of these meetings at Cathedral High School and Hibernian Hall, and 2 of them here. And I state to you with every affirmation that I can drum up that our voice has no influence, no authority, no control, that this thing is going to happen in spite of us. And I think it is so politically based that we are at a tremendous disadvantage. You can record us on film and auditory tapes, and you can publish our comments, but they mean nothing. Our direction should be to Tito Jackson, who's gone, to Mayor Menino, who supported this right from the very beginning. In fact, if you go back and look at the record, you will find that there was no community process to get that building built. And now, we want a community process to stop this right here, right now. We will not be silenced. We will not affirm or reaffirm the position of government, because what is lacking here is trust. We do not trust you. How can it be stated any more simply? We have an emotional response to defend ourselves against this process. And what we have learned is that in spite of us, it is built. In spite of us, they are doing research right now. And I think that we have to go beyond our simple voices in speaking out in opposition. That we have to go storm City Hall, occupy City Hall. Confront Tito Jackson to take a position. Let me tell you the story of why the Fenway, not even close to the south end, is affected by this. One would think that City Hall would have learned from this experience, that the lawsuits that are involved and the Blue Ribbon panel, that they would not make the same mistake again. Well, they have made the same mistake again, and it's right now in process. Northeastern University, across the street here, in Tito Jackson's district, has had a chemistry laboratory compromised, with cyanide being taken right out of the building in a suicide attempt. There was an incident, another suicide incident at Boston University just a couple of weeks ago. There was a suicide incident at Dana-Farber. Where are the protections? Where are our safeguards? When that Northeastern suicide took place, it was investigated by the fire department. And the investigation said, and I quote from the Boston Globe reporting, the fireman who investigated the living quarters of the suicide person said there was enough cyanide there to take out a neighborhood. If you know cyanide, there's very little that's required to commit suicide. Any institution that cannot control its controlled substances cannot be trusted.
The next four speakers are Ian Chinich, Gwen Creary, Sarah Driscoll, and Taylor M. Before anyone starts, I would just like to remind people to please adhere to the 3-minute limit. We do have a lot more people that want to comment tonight, so that we can get to everyone. I respectfully request that you adhere to the 3-minute time limit. Thank you. Mr. Chinich.
Hello, my name is Ian Chinich. I'm a graduate student at Boston University. I came to offer my support and support of a lot of students who've been working for a lot longer at the university than I have in opposing this lab. And it's showing solidarity with the affected communities, particularly in the areas around where the facility's been built, but also in the rest of the city which would be affected in case of any kind of contamination. And one of the questions that we often hear on campus for support of it is, well, you know, it's located in the position it is because of its location to the medical facility. What that means is ease of transportation, and what that actually means is cost. So essentially the facility's been located in the area it is because of the cheapness factor in locating it there rather than the safety factor in preventing any kind of contamination. So mostly this is about profit. This is about profit for the facilities that are making this. This is about profit for the scientists who are working on it. And this is essentially one long chain in subcontracted defense spending by the United States government. What we've also found out is that this facility is now one of approximately 15 or 16 facilities across the country. 15 or 16 facilities that are all testing diseases that actually have no real human effect in this country or in most portions of the world, and that what they will be testing on is weaponized forms of these. Since we all know that terrorist attacks by weaponized forms of these agents are very infrequent, as it takes years and scientists working on them, we can only expect that what they really mean is weaponized forms by governments. So for us, what this means is that our country is building a giant facility and framework for stockpiling what they call defensive biological weapons, but what could actually be offensive biological weapons, which, as previously been stated, is illegal under our own laws. Furthermore, they're going to be testing and creating agents that don't actually exist in reality. Weaponized forms which are more deadly than the actual versions of these diseases, all because of the reason and rationale that they have to test them. So what this means is we're going to be stockpiling even more dangerous forms, which could have an even greater effect than the natural diseases which they've actually been testing in this framework. And as previously been stated, there's no actual list of any of the pathogens that they're going to be testing, only alleged forms or certain forms of potential pathogens that they could be testing. And as we all know, the only case of domestic biological weapons that have ever been used on this country was by a scientist leaving one of these facilities and actually using it on our population. So by creating and proliferating more of these facilities, we're actually making a greater danger for domestically. We're giving more chances for more scientists to have more access to these pathogens. And so not only am I opposed to having this facility in the city, I'm opposed to it in the country, and I think that by trying to save money, we're putting our citizens at risk. Thank you.
My name is Gwen Prairie, and I'm a longtime resident of Roxbury. And I just had one comment. I wanted the NIH Blue Ribbon panel to explain. Nobody has explained why the needle or the building is a couple of 100 yards from the biggest trauma center in the city. That hasn't been explained to me or in the report, and I'd like an answer to that. Okay, that's my comment.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Driscoll?
Yes, hi, good evening. I'd like to just take a moment to defer. Councilor Felix Arroyo Jr. is here, and so I'd like to give him a few moments of my time, and then I'll speak after him.
That was very kind of you. Thank you.
I'm sorry, but could you state
my
your
name
name
is
again?
Felix Roy. I'm an at-large member of the Boston City Council, resident of Jamaica Plain.
Thank you.
And I'll be brief because I realize I'm taking some of her time. And just to say that I'm still not convinced, and I am still opposed to a Bio-Level 4, not only in this site, but frankly, anywhere within the boundaries of the city of Boston. And I wanted to put that on the record, and I would also want to clear something that I heard. I know for a fact that Tito Jackson is also opposed to this and testified so. So I would hope that when we're speaking of people's records, it's fair game to do so, but please use the facts as they are. So thank you for the time. I will now defer back to the person who was so kind to give me some of her time. Thank you.
Hi. Yeah, okay, cool, thanks. Good evening, I'm Sarah Driscoll. I'm from Jamaica Plain. I've been working on this project for about 8 years to stop the biolab, and I'm with Ian. Not in my backyard, not. No biolabs anymore, no Bio-Level 4s. So I'm going to address the risk assessment. So given the interminable length of the risk assessment and the lack of promised executive summary, the transportation of the pathogens to and from the lab site is still woefully under-addressed in Chapter 5. First, to not have addressed the employee and or visitor travel, and most important of all, commuter patterns, is, to use a word we don't encourage our children to use, stupid. Not to mention negligent, since there is plenty of evidence for malevolent acts, possible secondary transmission, excuse me, and possible transmission. So hello, MBTA nightmare. Secondly, potential drivers of these materials, are they going to be subjected to background checks? And what are the security requirements for them to be hired at all? There is no mention of this in Section 5-7. There are other issues, such as the correct packaging of pathogens for shipment, with the conclusion unverified with data that this is an unlikely occurrence. Really? Love that self-assuredness. How about what happens in all of our bridges, tunnels, or during rush hour? And what happens when first responders are affected? They leave the scene unknowingly, possibly infecting others with a potentially lethal virus. There are just some more pieces in a puzzle that is completely inadequate and an insult to the community's intelligence. Please remember, we've been at this for 10 years. Maybe you've had children grow up in this period of time. Who are they to, who might live near a site as dangerous as this, and it could be a danger to in danger of a great and hideous death? Do we deserve this danger? No. Does anyone deserve this danger? No. I oppose any BSL Level 4 labs and hope that we would like some answers and stop this lab. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Taylor M.
Hi, my name is Taylor Miles. I'm a recent graduate of Boston University. Though BU students may have still seen me on campus because BU, the NIH, and the City of Boston, particularly Mayor Menino, won't seem to give up on this lab, so I get to continue to hang out on my campus. I had heard about the lab, here and there as a student at BU, but then I went to a forum and I heard Claire Allen speak, and I got the facts, and I don't know really what else we need to hear here. This is a blatant form of environmental racism. It has failed all the risk assessments. The community has been opposing it for over 9 years now. It's extremely dangerous, extremely unnecessary, and as my good friend Ian was saying, in order to test these things, you'll also have to create them, which is extremely concerning. During my time at BU, I was editor for the independent student newspaper there, and I did some reporting on the biolab, but it just got to a point where I couldn't be doing objective reporting on something that was so blatantly wrong, and I needed to be out there at the protests and the different rallies that have been held. If you just do some research on the history of how my former university approached the Roxbury community, that in itself is just extremely upsetting, and overall, this just seriously embarrasses me as an alumna of Boston University. There are so many different questions that have not been answered here, but I think the most pressing is just, why should this lab ever open in the community of Roxbury? Why should Level 4 Biolab ever open, but particularly in the community of Roxbury? That question will never be answered. So I just want to say the community opposition is only going to continue. BU student and alumni opposition is only going to continue, and we aren't going to let this Level 4 lab open.
The next four speakers are Katie S., Lisa Kane, Walter Newman, and Kristen Martin.
Hey everybody, I'm Katie. I'm from Alston, and in May I graduated from Boston University, which is one of the creepy and unaccountable institutions behind the building of the Bioterror Lab. So I'd just like to say shame on BU and on the NIH for building this unsafe, environmentally racist bioterror lab and for attempting to open it over the wishes of Roxbury residents. It's unnecessary because it does not purport to research diseases that have impact on the lives of Roxbury residents. It does research that is being done elsewhere and safer, and you don't need live viruses to do this. It doesn't require a BSL-4 lab, and it doesn't need to be in a densely populated urban area that has repeatedly told you for years and years that it does not want you here. So in conclusion, as an alum and as a concerned citizen, I'm going to do whatever I can to support the students who are fighting the fight on the campus and the folks from Roxbury Safety Net who are opposing this lab, and just do whatever I can to help them make sure that it does not open.
Lisa Kane.
I would just like to say that history is really replete with examples of groups of people discerning a horrendous event coming and naming it and cautioning people and then becoming the victims. And this is the number of people hours that have gone into these 10 years of meetings and people preparing in all kinds of different ways to come here and say their most earnest, in their most earnest way. This cannot happen. And yet, this is a tragedy. Because look at the person next to you. This is the last meeting tonight. And where does it go from here? It's over. So what's going to happen? This is the last scheduled meeting of all. And I just would say that, you know, use your own head to just convince yourself that this really, it can't happen, and there have to be ways beyond these kinds of meetings to have things change, because I've seen panels here looking down and talking, looking down at and talking down to people in the audience, and I've seen numbers that make absolutely no sense at all. I'm sure that a lot of people in this room are unconvinced by figures that say this is a 1 in a 10 million chance that this could possibly happen. What is that? We all know that there are other level 4 labs that have had problems with people walking out of the lab with some sort of contamination. These figures just, they're just not real. So I would just like to say that the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease really needs to look at it itself for even thinking of allowing something like this to be in any kind of a populated area, and you really wonder why they have to be at all.
Walter Newman. Walter Newman here. Kristen Martin.
Hello, my name's Kristen, and I am currently a student at Boston University, and I'll keep this comment really quick and really blunt. Since I began my studies at BU, I have been ashamed and disgusted at my university's irresponsible pursuit of this biolab, a blatant display of environmental racism. This process is a sham, and your statistics, your 20-pound binder, your PowerPoint carry very little weight in light of your blatant disrespect for the wishes of Roxbury's residents. And I will continue to stand in solidarity with the community of Roxbury in opposing this biolab until it is a thing of the past. Thank you.
The next 4 speakers are David Rorlick, Mary Crotty, Mel King, Jerry Frank.
Hello, my name is David Rorlick. I'm a member of the Massachusetts Green Rainbow Party, which has consistently opposed this project over the years and still opposes it. I'm also a resident of Boston and a BU faculty member. There are a lot of things to comment in this so-called risk assessment, but I will focus my comments on one slide in the presentation. The slide that refers to the possibility of malevolent action. Now, there are numbers that appear on that slide and on all the slides. Those are numbers, like one event in 10,000 years, one event in 100,000 years, one event in 1,000,000 years. I want to talk about something that occurred less than 11 years ago. And the fact that it's not even mentioned on that slide about the possibility of malevolent incidents puts the entire report it makes the entire report lose credibility. It's so egregious, that slide, among others, but I'm going to focus on that slide. It's so egregious not to mention it, that the entire credibility of the presentation is lost. What am I referring to? It's been mentioned, it's been alluded to by one speaker. Less than 11 years ago, there was a biological terror incident in this country. 5 people died. Several others were injured. Millions of people were afraid to open their mail. Fall of 2001. You remember it? Yes, I do. I bet everybody in this room remembers it. There was an investigation by the top law enforcement authority in this country, Federal Bureau of Investigation, under the auspices of the Department of Justice. A lot to say about the investigation, mighty unprofessional, but it is the last word of the Department of Justice, of the FBI. So let's take it at face value. It concluded that a crime was committed, first of all. And it identified the person who it said was responsible for the crime. A man by the name of Bruce Ivins, who conveniently committed suicide before he was actually charged. But he was, well, there's a lot to say there. And he also identified where the anthrax bacillus emanated from. So Bruce Ivins, the alleged perpetrator, the anthrax bacillus from a specific source. What was the conclusion of the FBI? Bruce Ivins, an employee of a federal biosafety lab in Fort Detrick, Maryland, and the source of the anthrax bacillus was a lab in Fort Detrick in the biosafety lab itself. For you to mention a million years, 5 million years, one incident is an insult to the intelligence and to the historical memory of the entire audience.
Mary Crotty.
I'm Mary Crotty. I'm a nurse attorney with the Massachusetts Nurses Association, and as Sandy Eden testified earlier, we have taken a position opposed to the biolab and have worked strongly to oppose it for several years now. I also want to say I think we should commend those people, David Mundell and others, who waded through the 1,700-page document that people here were expected to read, and note that it's kind of interesting timing. We heard from our Supreme Court Justice Anthony Scalia a couple weeks ago that certainly no one could expect him to have read all 2,000 pages of that Obama healthcare law that he was to rule on. So I think, you know, there's a point that we need to sit and think, what are we asking of people? We understand, just to step back a moment in time, as our last speaker did, the 25,000 nurses of the Massachusetts Nurses Association understand where this all came from. In the hysteria, the aftermath of 9/11, the search for weapons of mass destruction, the feeling that something had to be done. Where we're lost, though, is how this somehow got translated into just a crackpot scheme to create weapons of mass destruction in downtown Boston where they didn't exist. We just don't get it. This is not a lab. I think our very first speaker said that there was enormous potential for this lab, and I want to come back to that. This is not a lab that's been designated for any public health purposes. The only reason you need level 4 lab is to study agents that are primarily used as bioweapons. This is a bioweapons facility. There's an incredible need for public health research. I want to point out that there has been a very impressive professional document put together by a number of scientists that have worked with us to oppose the lab. an alternative use document for this laboratory. The facility's been built. I understand now there's a political need to defend it, but it doesn't have to be used for the purposes it was designed for. It can be used to support badly needed research in the area of antibiotic-resistant infections, drug-resistant TB, flu, things that are really, truly public health risks. I think that's what we should be looking at. Just to stick strictly to the risk analysis that was done. Chapter 2.6, the risk analysis says that the facility, that the site here in Boston is appropriate because of its, because it's on the BMC campus. That's just stunning. That's the last place you want to put a facility. You really don't want to wipe out one of your major downtown teaching hospitals. And there simply is no capacity. There's no new isolation facilities that are being built at Boston Medical Center. Boston Medical Center, in fact, is $70, $80 million in the hole year after year. We have people that are stacked up in emergency rooms right now, waiting for hours to be seen. We have psychiatric patients that are waiting days to be seen, that are we have homeless that are sleeping in some of our downtown teaching hospitals for days at a time. We have no extra capacity to handle any surge that would happen if there is an incident in the lab. We also, as an aside, have no confidence in the siting. I want to point out to the group, I don't believe I heard it mentioned tonight, another biolab was built in Galveston, which is a hurricane barrier island. That's the kind of thinking and strategy that's gone into the siting of these labs. The absurdity just stuns us. That lab flooded also a few years ago when a hurricane hit Galveston, and a couple of our nurses from M&A were down there at the time working, and were not told about the flooding in the lab. They were put at terrible risk. We see people, there was severe flooding in northeastern Massachusetts a few years ago. The Boston Globe had pictures of old people sitting in grocery carts because hospitals weren't prepared to accept them when their senior citizen and nursing homes flooded because Medicare hadn't approved them for temporary housing. Year after year, we have storms that hit central Massachusetts. We have poor residents of Worcester that are left without heat, without power for weeks at a time. I, of course, don't need to remind you about all the people of color that were left sitting on rooftops after Katrina. And yet, we're led to believe that Boston is better situated to handle a disaster. We just don't buy it.
May I please wrap up your comments?
All right, I'd like to strongly encourage you to get back to my earlier point, to think about alternative appropriate uses for this laboratory.
Mr. King?
Gentleman from the Fenway said what I think is as significant about this as anything. And for me, the issue starts with the dishonesty in the initial granting of the funds by NIH to BU. The court session in Cambridge, where it was first brought, clearly showed that as the judge asked questions of BU and the state, where they answered no. Did you try any other place? Did you do any analysis? No. Right? What made you believe it would work? No answer. And he said that it was arbitrary and capricious. And I sat in the court and I thought about the black folks who, when the court said, you don't have any rights that white people have to respect. And I sat there and I said, this is exactly what the judge was saying about the people in the South End, that we had no rights, that BU or the state at that point had to respect, and NIH went along with that, even knowing that the court had said that the decision for it to go forward was arbitrary and capricious. Since then, and now as a member of the plaintiff in the federal court, we've had the court say, go back and due diligence. Your last one, the group came back and said was a sham. And so you're going back again. And what we have again here is a sham, right? If you heard what was said about the anthrax stuff and how this was just a little while ago, as I looked at those numbers up there where they talked about 1 in a million, 10,000 years or whatever, I said, that's cuckoo. We have people being affected by things daily, and it doesn't seem to matter. Listen, this to me is very simple. If you respect the rights of people, then you will tell the NIH folks that this is not the way to go about it. The report, all those pages, who would you expect to do that? Do we know whether there are any people on this group who had a different point of view? Is there a second opinion from anybody else? You know, even with the Supreme Court, they at least have a way that the other justices who don't agree with the first part are able to come and say why they don't think the decision by the majority worked. We don't even have the benefit of that because we know that you didn't want to hear from scientists who would have had another opinion. And that is because you are lockstep into trying to make this thing happen. And folks, it's one thing to go after NIH. I think there are some local folks, the mayor, for example, and Governor Patrick, that we have to go after as well. Right? We have to go after them. And it may take some demonstrations. It may take stopping traffic and a lot of things around the hospital, but we're gonna have to do it if we are serious about protecting the interests of a lot of people here. Understand this, if all the communities around us have passed laws of preventing level 4 labs in their communities, why is it that we are the butt of it? Why is it that we here in Boston have to be subject to what all the communities around us say, not in our backyard. It shouldn't be in anybody's backyard. Thank you.
I'm taking Jerry's place. I'm Beverly Sky. I'm on the board of the Union Park Neighborhood Association. We do not dispute that this research is important for humanity. We object to the fact that it will be conducted in our humanity. In a densely populated area next to a major highway, all we need is one deranged person to fill a van with explosives and pull over on the expressway during rush hour and set it off. That would be the equivalent of a major earthquake that would damage this glass building. This research puts our entire city at risk. 1 in a million, once in 2,000 years, once in 2 million years. These are the risk assessment numbers we are being offered by this huge risk assessment study. Don't they sound reassuring? What are the odds? Much like the possibility of winning a megabucks lottery. Someone does win. Unfortunately, in this case, if BU wins, we all lose. Corporations with a great deal of money to be made on government grants and funding will say everything is safe until disaster occurs, and then it is too late. Let us not forget Fukushima, Fukushima, Fukushima. That's right. All the scientists said it was safe to build a nuclear power plant there too. Where are they now? No doubt they are very busy checking their risk assessment numbers again. At the last public forum, the NIH panel indicated that nothing would be approved that did not have community support. Does that promise still hold? Will you keep your word to us? Are you listening to us? We are deeply disappointed that the mayor has turned his back on his people to support this misguided facility. Thank you.
Thank you. The next 4 speakers will be Austin O'Toole, George Kelly, Trish Gallagher, and Alice Kidder. Austin O'Toole? Okay.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to talk to the crowd as well because I don't think anybody else is listening. And I wonder how so many people from our community who represent our interests and everyone in this room who is from our community standing in opposition to this idea have not yet been heard, and we've been at this for 10 years speaking in opposition, as a result of which we have 1,700 pages of explanations that no one can read or understand or buy into. And the question must be asked, why is it that the NIH, the Institute of, what is it, NIH, National Institute of Health, is speaking to an event that is quite possibly going to affect our city and all of the people who are surrounding it, not only Roxbury, but those of us who are in the South End, those of us who use the expressway, those of us who use Stroh Drive, those of us who even go to the airport and fly back and forth and come in from the different countries that services as well. Why is the National Institute of Health involved in a facility that's level 4 bioterror, fodder, weaponry, whatever it is? They're hiding something on us. What is it that they're calling themselves the National Institute of Health while they're putting the whole city at risk? And if they want to do this, why are they doing it in the middle of our city? Why are they doing it in Roxbury? Why have they selected this facility to be in this community with our leaders, all of whom have stood in opposition, and everyone in this room? Is there anyone in this room that supports this idea? And if so, where are you? And why aren't we hearing from you?
Not one person.
Why aren't they hearing us? And why do we have 10 years later been speaking to the NIH about something that has nothing to do with health, but which has to do with catastrophe? This sounds like a haunted building being placed in the middle of a community, unlike something that any city has ever heard of before. This is a haunted building. It's full of ghosts of diseases and ghosts of the flus and the vaccinations that they're supposedly working on to protect our health. This isn't a health facility. This is a bioterror facility, and it's putting us on the front lines of a war that may never get fought, except for in our community when there's a slip-up or a mistake or any number of the things that could happen, and we're the victims of the bioterror of our own doing? Why hasn't this stopped? And what are we going to do to stop it? Because the community isn't hearing us. And this is the last meeting. So think about that, because our politicians have come, I'm not sure if they're still here, they want to be heard by us, but what are they doing? And why hasn't it been done for 10 years? And why have 1,700 pages been written about we don't know what that nobody understands and nobody's buying into? 1,700 pages to explain what? If there's no risk, why do we need 1,700 pages to convince us of that? Thank you.
George Kelly.
Hi, folks. My name is George Kelly, Labor Union Local 223, Boston, Massachusetts. From a historical perspective, smallpox. From a historical perspective, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. From a historical perspective, the syphilis experiment down in Tuskegee, Alabama. HIV/AIDS, which has been found to have been produced by man. We are on a deadline, we're on a collision course with death. And the book of Jeremiah says, for mass feeding of birds. I say to you that this will happen because this has been prophesied to happen. We don't have to go that way. But racism, hatred, and greed still have prevalence in America. Man is not peaceful enough to deal with environments like this. And I say to you, sir, that you will cause the deformation of this planet. And what we're going to have, folks, is going to be an outbreak experience. And what I mean by that is, let's just say an outbreak happens, or let's say within 5 miles, Boston has to be nuclearized in order to eradicate the germ. In other words, low-range neutron bomb has to be exploded over the area in order to eradicate the germ. Otherwise, it's going to spread throughout the nation. So in other words, 2 million people are going to be eradicated off the planet because of a biological experiment.
Hello, my government. Hello, my neighbors. My name is Trish Gallagher. I'm a resident of Dorchester, the neighboring community to Roxbury. I'm wearing this costume biohazard suit to demonstrate my absolute opposition to placing a bioterror lab, and let's admit it, that's what it is, anywhere on Earth, particularly in an urban area, and especially in Roxbury, Massachusetts. Is BU going to distribute biohazard suits to every child, woman, and man in the Metro Boston area? I doubt it. Even a 1 in a million chance is a non-negligible risk. The risk of winning the March 30th Mega Millions lottery was, and that jackpot was $650 million. But the risk of winning that lottery was 1 in 176 million. Not much of a chance. Certainly far less of a chance than 1 in a million. Yet, there were 3 winners. Do not play the lottery with human life. Thank you, sir.
Alice Kidder.
Alice Kidder from Watertown, Massachusetts. I come here because people in my church in Cambridge are very concerned about this, and I remember that the United Church of Christ some years ago raised up the issue of environmental racism, and we're very concerned about that. I think that the risk assessment doesn't say that if you don't build it, there's no risk.
The next 4 speakers are Susan Hardin, Cornelius Roddick, Virginia Pratt, and I can't make out the last name on this last one, but the first name is Prasanan. Sorry.
Hi, my name is Susan Hardin.
I have one question and 2 points, maybe 3. First of all, a question I'd like to have on record is an analysis of the locations of all of the bio-level 4 labs in existence and on the planning boards, and in terms of the positioning of this one in this kind of neighborhood and place. How does it compare to all the ones that exist and all the other ones that are on the drawing boards? So I would expect to get an answer to that. Thank you. First of all, I've got to say that there is no doubt that this is political, on top of being financial. But I recall that about the same time that we were meeting 2 years ago in Faneuil Hall, the senators from the state of New York determined that placing a bio-level 4 lab at the tip of Long Island, not the closer tip to Manhattan, but the opposite one, was much too close to Manhattan, to a populated area. And so that ended any discussion. About that same time, I found the opportunity to come face to face with the mayor himself, His Honor Menino. And I said, Mayor Menino, there are many of us that are citizens of this city that are gravely concerned about this bio-level 4 lab. And he said, that is a done deal. It is a done deal. It is a done deal. He repeated it 3 times to make sure that I knew that 2 years ago it was a done deal. If that's not political, I don't know what is. Thirdly, I would like to compare this to the situation of siting this lab here and the lab itself to something else that is of a level 4 and maybe more than a level 4 as we know now, and that's siting any kind of nuclear facilities. On the one hand, you can come down, go down, you know, look, the big battle that's going on with Vermont Yankee, and the one that's happening in Pilgrim Power Plant, and you may not be aware that our communities to the south at every one of their town meetings is asking that the relicensing of these power plants not happen until we find out and implement the safety measures from Fukushima. All right, so there's a lot of, but if you look at one of the nuclear power plants, if you go to it, you can't walk in the front door, you can't walk out the back door and get on a subway. It's in an isolated area, there's fencing all around, there's a huge perimeter of open land. Not so with this. However, on the other hand, there's another place that I'm familiar with, and that's Livermore Lab, where they do research. That's in California. Let me tell you, when you're doing research like this, there are armed guards at the gate, barbed wire, fences. You don't even see the building from the outside, from the road. We've got land in this country if you really want to do something like this. It doesn't belong in the middle of a city. The other point I want to make, though, is that I'm sorry to be finding out that the National Institute of Health is no better and maybe fits into the same category as the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which still insists that we should license our nuclear power plants, even though we are right now, as we speak, still being threatened by the Fukushima nuclear fallout. It's going across the country. It's been measured on the West Coast and it's coming here. All of the damage that they said would never happen and don't worry about it, it's happening. It's really happening right now. So NRC, NIH, you're supposed to be working for us, and it doesn't seem like that's happening at all. Thank you.
Cornelius Roth.
Hi, my name is Cornelius Redick.
I live in Roxbury. I'm one of the 10 Roxbury residents who complained about this lab initially, going back 10 years. And I want to reaffirm what the gentleman said going back a little bit. He said, we just don't trust you. We just don't trust you. I cannot help it. The older I get, the less I trust, especially in terms of the politics that I see going on today. So anyway, the Big Dig thing and the biolab, they strike me as being very similar. The Big Dig was supposed to be very straightforward and all of that and all of that. And look what a boondoggle that turned out to be. So I'm confident that that's something that will happen also with the biolab, that those germs are going to get out, that there's going to be somebody who's going to be pissed off one day, and he's going to be like a Timothy McVeigh or some dude out there who killed 73 people. He decides he's going to off folks because he's got some political situation on his mind. So I know that that's what's going to happen here. There's no question about it. And also, I want to say that me being one of the 10 respondents was up on the website, myself and others who opposed this lab. Our names have been taken out. I'd like to know why that was. I think that was the wrong thing to do. Also about the mayor, you know, I voted for his honor. I voted for him year after year after year after year. But I see that he let Borders Bookstore close, although that doesn't seem to be related. To me, it represented a spot where people of color could go and do their own research. And if they didn't have to go to the library, they could have gone to Borders. He could have done something about that. And I'm very upset over that. And in addition to that, now he wants to raise the rate so that people can't even get around. So I'm saying that the attitude of the people who are in power towards the people who live here, I think is really a terrible thing. You know, so I know that these germs is going to get out. I know it. Somebody is going to do that, some so-called terrorist, but he's going to consider himself to be a patriot. And one day, we're all going to regret doing this here.
Virginia Pratt.
Thank you. I'll identify myself as being with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, the Boston chapter, and for 10 years we've been going to the meetings. We've had representatives at all of the meetings, and it's been a long struggle, and I share the sentiments of everyone in the room who has said the most serious issue here is that there's no credibility or trust. I really appreciate a lot of the big thinking that people have done. And I also want to say that I'm very glad that people have said that they're opposed to a bioterror lab, they're opposed to development of bioweapons. That's something that we have seen as a moral issue. It's also coming on the heels, as was mentioned, of Fukushima, and the hubris that's proposed by the NIH is just so striking. The idea that there couldn't be an incident, or that we should just simply be reassured, or the best minds have worked on this. I guess I have to say that I've been thinking more simply, and I've been thinking, okay, like what's in a laboratory? You know, there are specimens, there are animals who probably are going to be injected with all these horrible things. There are people like janitors who have to clean up. And we live in a city that has a lot of people who English is not their first language. And a lot of times the people for whom English is not their first language are doing jobs that are very dangerous and also not getting paid very well. So I think about like, well, you know, if there are animals and there are specimens, what would be a likelihood that somebody who's a cleaning person would become infected? Probably there's some likelihood of that. What about if they have to wash something and there's water? Water is something that is a finite resource. I've recently learned, like all the water that's on the planet is the same water that's always been on the planet, and water is becoming increasingly contaminated. So if they have to wash something in the lab, where does that go when it goes down the drain? Does it go to the Deer Island treatment facility? Does it go to Malibu Beach, where I like to swim in the summer? I hope not. What about the fact that with any type of environmental cleanup, cleanup is a relative term. Like if you look at a super site, these things are never really completely clean. It's a relative kind of clean. So what about the fact that people who work in the lab have to wear these suits? They have to suit up. And so what does that mean? It means it's really dangerous. So we don't have suits, and we're not going to have $2,000 suits. So nor do I want to live in a city where I feel like I need to have a respirator and a suit on. There's a report out today that 1/2 of the people in this country are in poverty. 50% of the people in this country are in poverty. Why are we spending, not we, why is it being shoved down our throat to spend astronomical amount of money to manufacture bioweapons, to kill people and to terrorize people, when, as was stated earlier, we've got homeless people sleeping in the hospitals because they don't have another shelter to go to. Our dear Felix Arroyo Sr. was at one of these hearings one time, and he said, they talk about jobs and how there are going to be jobs if we build this thing. He said, for my money, we could build a supermarket, and we could have the same number of jobs probably, and especially the same number of jobs for people in the community, and pay would probably be about the same. And I just want to say that as a member of WILF, as a Boston resident, no, no, and no to the Bio-Level 4 lab. There are so many ways that we could reinvest this money, and the U.S., the most belligerent country on the planet right now, should be toned down and not gearing up for more war weapons. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rasan Al-Bartasardi. I live in Newton, Mass. And for 10 years, many of us in Newton, Massachusetts, which is about 5 miles from here, have opposed this lab. And I'm happy to say that our former mayor, David Cohen, who was mayor when the lab was proposed, and the Board of Aldermen also came out in public in opposition to this facility. So many of us who live in the area stand with the residents of Roxbury, the South End, who are going to bear the brunt of this facility. Now, I just have 2 questions for Tetra Tech that I would like them to take up when they do revisions on their risk assessment. The first is, a number of speakers have talked about what are the various probabilities of various events happening. I mean, I don't think we can actually attach very good probabilities to a lot of these events. We don't have that much data and so on. But I think another important question is, what level of risk is acceptable? And how do you determine that level, the level that's acceptable? I mean, why should we accept what Tetra Tech, NIH, BU, that level of risk that they say is acceptable? What about the community's perspective? So how do we deal with these differences? That I would like them to address in this risk assessment. I mean, it's not enough just to tell us, oh, the risk is this, but why is this an acceptable level? The second question is, a number of speakers have talked about accidents. Lynn Klotz talked about 3 cases of SARS released from level 4 labs. There have been accidents in BU laboratories in the time that this BSL-4 facility has been debated. There was the famous incident of the tularemia infections, which BU tried to cover up. And they did not follow the proper reporting procedures. So when NIH or BU officials wonder why there's such a lack of trust in this audience, look at yourselves. Look at what you've done. Look at what you've funded NIH. Look at the record. Now, given this history of accidents, someone looking at risk assessment from the outside, like me, would say, why should we not adopt a precautionary principle? Why, if the risk of accidents is not zero, why place this lab in a place where accidents could lead to great disasters, like the center of Boston? So where is the precautionary principle in the Tetra Tech risk assessment? That seems to be an essential part of trying to understand risk and coming up with strategies to deal with risk, and is ignored in this risk assessment. Thank you.
Hi, I want to address this public too because my heart is pounding. I feel infuriated. I feel that there's people that have no conscience, that put money before and profits before lives, and that you decide what you want to do with your life, but I don't respect anybody who does that. I'm sorry. And I want to say that we should take this time to realize that for 9-10 years we've been talking about this, we've been trying to be rational, we've been trying to convince them because we believe that they can be convinced that they can be rational human beings. But the fact that some people put profits before lives, it's a reality. Let's face it, we are not going to continue. They are not going to give us any more information. You can present all the most specific scientific information to them that says that this is wrong to do, and they are not going to come up with anything. 10 years is enough. Let's try to do something different. We have to change our tactics because this is what's happening. The lab is functioning at the level 3 already. 10 years of explaining, 10 years of asking them for change. It's not going to happen. Let's save our energy, not try to convince them anymore, but use our energy to focus on a different tactic of to stop this. We have to stop it.
Ma'am, could you state your name for the record, please?
My name is Yvonne Cruzado, and I am not a scientific, I am not a scientist, I'm sorry, I am not even an intellectual. I am a mother, and I am somebody who works in a hospital, and I treat the people that I see with dignity, because I think that everybody deserves dignity, everybody deserves to be treated as a human being, and those who don't are not my friends.
The next four speakers are Richard Nathan. I cannot make out the last name on this. The first name is Peter. It looks like the last name might be Blake Loft. Does that sound like, okay. David Lewitt. And this name I cannot make out either. I think the person is from Waltham. Looks like the last name might be Stetler. We'll come back to that. Richard Nathan.
So, can we agree that a level 4 biolab in a metropolitan area is unprecedented in the United States? Has there been any? There are 9 on military bases. There's one that's privately owned. There are others in rural areas that are connected to facilities, but you're not going to answer me, so I'll take that as a yes.
This is not a question and answer format, sir.
You are still talking to me, though. I appreciate a little interaction. Well, now that you've shown us a great presentation of facts and figures that prove you've taken every precaution to eliminate risk, now I want to talk to you about an uncalculatable risk: human error. This is actually pretty relevant with a recent story at BU that has to do with the police conduct, actually, that has resulted in some unfortunate unveilings that occurred with a hazing incident. At my ACA meeting, a police officer handed out a completely unredacted report on the recent hazing. 5 men naked, duct taped to each other, covered in various condiments and sauces is not considered sexual assault, even if they were beaten with an iron pipe and forced to drink out of it. Now, I know the victims' names because I have this report, because BUPD on the scene. Well, okay, the hazing is complete now that I know the names. This wouldn't have happened if the people in power labeled this as a sexual assault. BPD and BUPD were on the scene. Human error comes from inconsideration, I think, mislabeling, failing to identify the truth. The results are accidental, unintended. The officer that handed out the report had good intentions. The reporting officer from BU had good intentions to let the victims believe that they weren't sexually assaulted. Unfortunately, that label would have saved them privacy. From the record, the police keep forever. I believe you could be doing this with good intentions, possibly defending the lab for the premise of national security. Again, this lab is unprecedented in the 1950s. New York had the decency to put their lab on Plum Island, far removed from the city. Now, this lab is actually being moved to Manhattan, Kansas. Have you ever heard of that town, sir?
You can't answer you.
If you can drive a truck through it, it's not safe. The threat of the BU lab needs to disappear, does not need to be there. Again, this is considerate of every possibility. For my own worry about BUPD's bad decision, people in power cannot evaluate the risk. Because, yeah, I'll say it again. The people in power cannot evaluate the risk because the police are scathed against college tourists puking on their doorstep. Because BU can have the convenience of bringing their dirty business in our city for their profit. There are 15 level 4 labs, 9 on military grounds, 1 is privately owned and not-profit. 1 does not need to be in the city at all.
Peter? There a Peter here? Fulton Street, Peter? Okay. David Lewitt?
My name's Dave Lewitt. I'm from the Alliance for Democracy. I'm co-chair of the Campaign on Corporate Globalization and Positive Alternatives. I think that the risk assessment panel was narrowly composed or narrowly instructed. There were four criteria that were under examination: needle stick, centrifuge, earthquake, and traffic accident, transportation. These are all accidents. What was missing, it seems to me, was the elephant in the room. Not accidental release, but controlled release. How can that be? I would like to know what the interests of the Pentagon and the CIA have been in this biolab, particularly a level 4 lab. the Pentagon was certainly largely responsible for Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and also Dresden and Pyongyang, which were firebombed dreadfully. Weapons of mass destruction. And here we have the Pentagon moving into Africa, having already devastated large parts of the Middle East. Africa, where Ebola was said to have arisen, which might make an interesting cover for an outbreak of Ebola, which is one of the level 4 pathogens. So the populations at risk there are far more numerous than just the Boston area. And somebody has to speak for those populations. So I would simply ask the panel to be clear about the interests of the CIA and the Pentagon, and that level 4 research and development of new varieties of pathogens should not go forward in any laboratory. Thank you.
I just wanted to mention that it is now 9 p.m. If anyone that has not signed up, we still have a few more names to go through on the list, but if there are more people that wish to sign up, I would encourage you to do so now. The next speaker, I can't make out the name, but it's Riverview Avenue in Waltham, I believe.
Thank you. I'm going to go by the name of Jane Doe, and I think it's fitting because I would like to speak for the 99% of the people who cannot come tonight and who are clearly not being heard in this country anymore. I am very ignorant about this issue. For many, I understand it's the last panel. For me, it's my first. I came simply to be a body, to be in solidarity with the campaign that I know that has been going on for 10 years. And I remember people in this room asking me to come to meetings 10 years ago, and I didn't. And part of what strikes me here is how incredibly reasonable all the speakers have been. They care about the security of their community, about their job, about their kids going to school, about where people are working. People are being totally reasonable. But I feel like this is another public hearing that is a total sham. I feel like Mel King said it right, the word is sham. I feel like we, the 99%, are being held in contempt increasingly by the people who hold power, whether it's our government, the CIA, the Pentagon, or the corporations, and including you all. Even the notion that people can only stand here for 3 minutes and then they're cut off, to me is absolutely disgusting. These are people who are talking about safety and lives. And I feel like we're being treated in contempt. And I think it's time that we're clearly powerless. I'm struck here tonight again about how powerless we have become to determine anything about our future and our communities. And I think what's happening is that we're going to have to work to regain our power. What you all are doing by continuing not to listen is to radicalize the American population. And at some point, whether it's the biolab or it's a nuclear plant or the latest being able to be stripped and searched for being stopped for a traffic violation, is that the American public is going to get sick and tired of being reasonable. And you know, I welcome that day.
There are 5 names remaining that I'm going to read out. Mark Pelletier, Michael Coate, David Rold, Claire Allen, and Akila Manna. Okay.
My name is Mark Pelletier, resident of Boston. I'm also a molecular biologist with 25+
years of experience in medical research. So I've reviewed every one of the risk assessments that have been put forward since 2004. I think there's been about 5 or so iterations of that. So we'll just get to some specifics on this one. So specifically in Chapter 6 on the risk assessment, or the threat assessment, there was omission of historical data as well as important scenarios. So in particularly the point that one speaker mentioned before me is that there's no mention of the Bruce Ivins attack, which initially, the only mention, so when you search through these whole 17, almost 1,800 pages, the only mention of those attacks are as a reason why we need to build one of these labs, because this attack happened. But yet there's no connection between the fact that, as the speaker pointed out very vocally, and I'm totally behind him, you know, this came from one of these labs. This was a respected and career scientist who had been working in a US government lab for 30 years, and he decided to sneak material out and use it for bioterrorism. So there was no modeling of that in anywhere in the report. And this is an incident that is the basis for supposedly needing these labs. You know, a huge omission. So, how would you possibly model something like that? I think that it was conveniently left out because it was obviously very difficult to model. They also at the same time downplayed, there was an anthrax attack from a government lab in Russia in 1979, and that was only referenced as not relevant to the needle situation. So here's another escape from a government-funded lab that kills some citizens, not really relevant to this analysis. Further in that section, Chapter 6, so they mentioned that if you want more information on why they chose the scenarios that they did or didn't, they said go to section G10.2.2. If you look for that in the document, it's not there. It doesn't exist. All right, so also along in that same chapter, there's also, they talk about another scenario, there was loss of pathogen that they were supposed to model. And they said that there was no similar events that happened in the past that they could use to model this on. I guess they forgot about the 9,000 vials of various specimens that turned up missing from the Fort Detrick lab. That's probably about 3 or 4 years ago. So some of that, they're not sure, it's maybe clerical error, but there's 9,000 unaccounted vials from a government-funded weapons lab. Furthermore, as several people pointed out, there was no discussion about how the lab-borne tularemia infections that happened at the BU Medical Center, how those happened. And this is in light of, and that was in 2007. In 2009, there was a similar lab-borne infection of Neisseria meningitis at the BU Medical Center. No mention of that in their analysis. So here is, an incident that they should be modeling in the facility that they should be modeling it in, and that's not even mentioned. That is somehow deemed as not relevant. So, as the speaker mentioned before me, this report has no credibility. I mean, they choose to focus on hypotheticals as opposed to focusing on incidents that actually happened and things that maybe we could learn something from. Especially if you want to understand how it happens to prevent something from happening, the same thing from happening again, maybe even worse, because now BU Medical Center is applying to work with even more dangerous infective agents. And so they can't even figure out how it happened with the less pathogenic organisms. So as we said, the lab report has this risk assessment has no credibility. This is really a political process, not a scientific one. So let's look at who's conducting the risk assessment. So it's Tetra Tech, and in particular, Dr. Aldi Gunlapalli. So Tetra Tech, if you go to their site, they have no experience. They have nothing on biosafety. Their knowledge center, which they highlight there, has no biosafety experience. There's no mention of biosafety in any of their featured projects. If you search for biosafety or BSL on their website, there are 0 hits. So Tetra Tech has 0 experience that we can see studying these types of problems. Dr. Gunlapalli, if you go to PubMed and look at what he's published lately, he publishes a lot on on communication of medical records and medical communications. He has no publications on these types of diseases, on working on any high containment laboratories. Even I would say the laboratory experience, the wet lab laboratory experience, looked like it happened back in the mid-90s. It was kind of my read from the published reports. So, of all the scientists and all the people in the United States, these are the best people to have picked to study this possible risk posed by this lab. There's an obvious, well, let's look at why they possibly were picked. Now, if we look at where Dr. Gunlapalli works, he works at the NIH-funded Rocky Mountain Center for Excellence in Biodefense for emerging infectious disease. So here he is, he's an employee of NIH who's contracted by NIH to study a lab that NIH has already sunk in a lot of money and pride to build. On top of that, Tetra Tech has been paid by NIH to assess any risk that this lab could possibly pose to the community. This is all very reminiscent. We all remember the financial meltdown that happened where the rating agencies were paid by the financial institutions to rate the securities that they were selling, and of course they were like, oh, these are great, you know, sell them, yeah, thanks for the money. Doesn't this all seem very reminiscent of that? And then what do we get for that? We got the financial
Sir,
meltdown.
please wrap up your comments.
Thank you, I will. All right, so, you know, obvious conflict of interest. You know, and so I guess over 1,700 pages. Looking at that, it really reminds me of something that we thought about back in high school when we were writing our essays. It's like, you know, I don't really know what to say. I'm just going to write down a bunch of stuff. You know, and the old saying was, if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with bullshit. The volume, this is a work of volume. This is not a work of quality. And believe me, I am a scientist. I work science. I talk science with scientists all the time. I have meetings with scientists. You know, the omissions that were left out of this would give pause and concern to any objective observer, scientific observer, who wanted to understand what risk this lab could possibly pose to the community. And then one last thing, I think the idea of occupying City Hall is definitely the next step. I would say that everyone should contact rocksafetynet@yahoo.com, because we do have to take this to the mayor. NIH doesn't really matter. We have to take this to various city councilors and the mayor.
Michael Coate.
Hello, my name is Mike Cote. It's got the weird French accents on the E and the O, sorry. And I live in Dorchester. I'm a member of Dorchester for Peace. I wanted to talk about, the last time we were here, we had a draft report that I was able to sort of go through and really show how absurd the math was. But I wasn't able to do that so much this time because there's almost no formulas anywhere in this report anywhere for you to be able to look at the way in which the slides are presented in the report in order to see whether or not the way in which these slides are being put together are logically consistent. It's really bad. In fact, I would call attention to the fact, I can't remember the exact page number, I think it's about 20 or 30 pages in, but there's one page where you can tell that there used to be a formula there at one point, because the text goes on, and then it drops down significantly, and then there's a gap, and then there's a word, and then there's another gap, and then there's a period. It clearly looks as though at one time there was a formula there, but that formula isn't there anymore. And it looks as though an effort was seriously made to go through this report to remove any possibility of being able to computer model anything that's presented in this report independently in order to verify that it exists. And one of the things that this report definitely relies on, and people have raised this point before, is that I can't say that I understand this report 100%. I haven't read this report. I haven't read every single word in this report, I apologize, but I have looked at every single page, and it literally is to the point to where if you want to be able to understand any of the slides, you have to have access to all the footnotes and to be able to see the footnotes and then be able to go back to whatever report or whatever science peer-reviewed journal published those original reports in order to find out whether the information that underlies the slides. Because all this stuff, any sort of computer modeling, any sort of formulas, probability statistics that was there in the previous version of the report, it's all gone. It's not there anymore. And I don't understand how that could happen. I mean, I understand that the last time we were here, I pointed out the fact that the number of times that absolute zero was used throughout the report was statistically impossible. You couldn't have that. That kind of stuff doesn't happen in a real life scenario. And so I'd like to, I know I'm getting into dangerous ground talking any kind of sports metaphor, but this is literally like reading a report that says the Boston Red Sox are better than the New York Yankees, and looking at the paperwork and not being able to find a single example anywhere where the absolute best player on the Yankees is is better than as the absolute worst player on the Boston Red Sox. You know, it is so biased, it's unbelievable. There's one of the things that I just found absolutely totally absurd when I got to it was there was the discussion about what would happen about plane crashes. There was examples of what are the odds that a plane would actually crash into this building and cause the possibility of a breach. And they were talking about the possibilities of what would happen if the plane crashed in New Hampshire, and what would happen if the plane crashed in Tingsboro, and what would happen if the plane crashed in Boston, as though they were equal probabilities, but they weren't taking into consideration of the fact that planes land in Logan Airport in Boston. I mean, the planes come down right over this site in order to land in this thing. And that doesn't happen in Tingsboro, and it doesn't happen in Peterborough, New Hampshire, in the same way that it happens in the vicinity of Logan Airport. And so there were underlying assumptions that are just absolutely absurd in the way the connections are made, that the whole presentation is stripped of any being of, I mean, it's heavily footnoted. I will commend you on that. It's heavily footnoted, and it's finally using fractions and percents and all that, which wasn't there before. But some of the underlying assumptions, unless you have access to a full medical library in order to research, like every single footnote on the bottom of every single page, there's no way that you could determine whether or not this thing is realistic or not. And so the absence of any sort of formulas in there in order to be able to verify the logic underneath some of the math that was used in some of these things, like saying that, you know, this has a 1 in 10,000 year, this has a 1 in 1 million year probability of occurring, none of that's there for us to be able to actually see it. We're having to be able to take it on face value. And the fact that that gap exists till about 20 pages in tells me that at some point formulas existed in this report. And I know from previous versions of this report that there were formulas there, and they're not there anymore. And it looks as though this report has been cleaned in order to create this sort of biased presentation. Thank you.
David Roll.
Thank you. My name is David Rold. I live in Weston, which is about 10 miles from here, and I'm an anti-war, anti-Zionist activist. My goal is peace and justice for everyone in the world, and I work with a lot of organizations, including the International Action Center, the American-Iranian Friendship Committee. I'm on the State Committee of the Green Rainbow Party of Massachusetts, and I'm a communist, and I respect the one and only God above, and God's prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And I wasn't intending to speak tonight, but I got here, and I can see that it's important to speak out on this occasion. So I'd like to say that before the formation of the so-called United States of America in the 17th and 18th century, the founders of the colony of Massachusetts, the leadership of the British colonists, used biological warfare, deliberately giving smallpox-infected blankets to the indigenous people in Massachusetts so that the British colonists could steal every inch of the land here. And since the formation of the United States of America, the federal government, the government of the United States, has constantly been perpetrating wars of aggression, racist wars of aggression, including biological warfare against people on this continent and people on every continent over in the world. And today the United States is perpetrating wars of aggression against people all over the world, including oppressed communities right here in Boston. And biological warfare is wrong. It's like wrong to be operating a lab to create biological weapons here or anywhere. And the bureaucrats and the so-called doctors who want to run this lab, as well as the mayor and the governor and the billionaires who own the government of the United States, they're committing an an evil, racist, imperialist, selfish, greedy act by trying to site this bioterror lab in the South End in Boston. And they should all be afraid of God's judgment after they die. But in the meantime, here on Earth, it's up to good people like us to try to stop this madness. That's all I have to say.
Claire Allen.
I just want to again say thank you for everybody coming and everybody speaking their mind. I'm glad that everybody spoke about points that were important to you and also spoke about how you felt about the presentation that was done earlier. I just have a problem with not knowing who I'm speaking with. So I was just wondering if there's any NIH, NIAID, BU. Folks, can you raise your hand so we know who you are? Be proud. There you are. Okay, thank you very much. Now I know who you people are. Okay, so anyway, I just wanted to see who folks were. And I think that I just want to say to NIAID and NIH and Tetra Tech, I think that this process was really messed up. And I know that we have been working with you all at least 8 years and have also been fighting you for 10 years. And all we have spoken about is community process and transparency. I really think that it's very, very, very unfair that the whole purpose of having a Boston meeting was because Maryland meetings were being held with the NRC and other experts around the table. Residents weren't able to attend the Maryland meeting, so we did fight to have Boston meetings so that we were able to speak about our comments and have discussions as well. For you to come into our community once again with this 10-year history of wanting to present what you have to say and then not having a discussion with us is very rude and very ignorant, and I really don't appreciate that. And so I don't think it's a fair process that you have created. I think that we should be able to have discussion. I think Tetra Tech should be able to stand up and represent the work that they've done and also be able to answer some of our concerns. As far as our comments is concerned, usually we see our comments at the end of the document. I have not seen any of our comments implemented in any of the documents, risk assessments that have come out. We still have a concern about the risk assessment. And one of my major concerns is our question has always been, the lab may not have an accident, okay? I know that that is possible, that is a probability, but it could. And the fact that our higher powers, our federal government, and the entities that are experts in this field have to go for a third time to do a risk assessment to prove your statement that there is no risk to our community is what makes you fail constantly. You are experts. You are the people that we are supposed to look up to. And when we say prove to us that there is no risk to us, you have 3 attempts. This attempt, you've heard our experts, who are experts from around the country, say you've done a poor job once again. That's scary. The other thing is that in the risk assessment, when we ask if there is a release, what is going to happen when there is a release in Boston? I'm not really looking at the figures and how you came about that. That's for the experts to talk about. But when there is some sort of incident, why isn't BU in the risk assessment? I don't understand why they aren't saying what their role is going to be. Because whatever you put in that book, they're going to have to implement. So it's BU, the Boston Public Health Commission, Mayor Menino, BioSquare. Where are these entities that we are supposed to go to get answers and questions? I'm sorry to say that I really did not agree with the BU tours. I understand that Mayor Menino has been trying to get this lab open, you know, for 10 years or 8 years or how many ever long. I understand that. I understand he wants to go down there and showboat and do his thing. That's fine. I just don't understand how NIH, how NIAD can say to me, and also the Energy Office can say to me, well, Claire, that's up to BU. You go talk to them. You are bringing people. BU literally and Mayor Menino, I just found out, brought over 300 people into that high-risk federal facility. Cameras going. They're showing backup systems. They're showing this, they're showing that, they're showing this, and they're showing that. We're talking, the wonder you haven't included malicious intent in your risk assessment. It makes no sense to give a tour. Let's not forget 9/11. 2 people came from Mission Hill and boarded that plane. Boston is not off the map. And to have a tour done with whomever, because residents were asked to come. You had a 24-hour check, birth certificate, and Social Security. That's it. You don't know who you let in that lab. Who do we speak to? If we are supposed to speak to someone when tours and things like this that don't make any sense, who are we supposed to speak to? NIAD told me that I'm supposed to speak to BU. NIH says I'm supposed to speak to BU. I speak to BU and they say, well, this is what we're doing. If there is an incident in this community, it will affect everyone within a 10-mile radius. We need answers. We need for BU to be accountable. You need to make BU accountable. And the risk assessment, you know, I just want folks to know, the final say are the judges. And BU has made a presentation to them saying that the 2, the 3, and the 4 is a package deal. One cannot open without the other. Now they got a waiver to open up the level 2. We're not gonna let you creep. We're not sleeping, and you see we're aware of what you're doing. Even your process of sending us a 2-volume document and saying, here is the risk assessment, y'all go ahead. We're sitting there going through it like crazy, and then the next minute you're saying, oh, wait a minute, that's not the risk assessment. Here goes this 1,700 page. So now we gotta drop what we did here and then go over here and try to digest this 1,700 page. Y'all can try to play us as much as you want to. You understand what I'm saying? Y'all can try to, you know, have us go through this book here, and y'all can do your little things here, but you haven't answered. Our questions are basic, and you're not answering our basic questions, and that's a problem, and the courts will hear that that is a problem. Thank you.
We still have 3 people listed that want to speak, and due to the time, I think these are going to have to be our last 3 speakers because we are running close to the end of the meeting. So the last 3 speakers will be Akia Mana, Donna Martinez, and I think this gentleman in the front, I think you wanted to say something. You'll be our last speaker. So Akia Mana.
Why do we have to stop? The NRC meeting happened. That meeting went until the NRC panel members said they had no more.
I believe we have a facility requirement as well, that there's a time we need to be out of the facility, and there's I believe, some time at the end for press questions and things of that nature. So I think this time would be best spent hearing from the community members, because I don't think we can do anything about extending the time.
Good evening. My name is Akila Mana, and I actually just found out about the meeting, unfortunately, and it wasn't well publicized. I guess you know that. And it was intentional, most likely. And I still take issue with the fact that we only have 3 minutes and no one else will be able to, people that we had more eloquent than myself weren't able to, you know, discuss the problems. I'm an Army brat. You see the scarf. Don't pay attention to the scarf. That's a religion. I'm an Army brat. I was raised going in and off of Army bases with my dog tags and my ID card. And we didn't have any terrorist facilities, when I was growing up. I mean, we just had trucks and people running in and out in different countries and stuff like that, but I'm sure it wasn't anything, this dire. We had, you know, like they have around this prisons, you know, with the with those barbed wires and the fences so high. And then we had police, you know, and I mean not police. We had the MPs with the halt, who goes there, whatnot. And they're not going to have that. Obviously, they don't have it, and they're not going to have it. And you know, why not? I mean, and plus, I mean, why put it in a glass facility? What are they joking? Glass? I mean, at least the you know, World Trade Centers were concrete, and they didn't have a chance in hell. You know, why would they put something like that in the middle of this city, in such a populated area? Everyone said this already. I'm not the only one with these feelings. I'm just going to be heard. I have to put my 2 cents in because I'm a citizen of Boston. Been here for the last 42, 43 years. After my father, you know, retired from the services, I knew nothing except the government. I learned that everything the government says, don't believe it. Okay, that's what I learned as an Army brat. Okay, whatever they told my father was a lie. You know, he gave his life for the United States of America. And we stood up for, you know, saluted at taps when the flag was being lowered and raised on the base. We stopped what we were doing and paid attention to that flag. But what do they do for the people? Not a thing. They take your money, you know. I love America. This is my country. This is my native language. I speak one language. Well, I speak a few. But this is my natural place of being, and I don't want to go anywhere else. No, I don't want to move out of Boston because these unfeeling, callous people want to put a life-threatening, you know, facility here for me to die. Okay? I mean, I don't particularly feel like dying when you finish with your money-making facility. You know, I just want to know who's in whose pockets. I can't figure out whether it's the government in BU's pocket or the BU's in the government's pocket. I can't figure out who's making money, you know, who is somebody's got something to do with something that's more than lives in the city of Boston. I mean, what could be worth than all of these millions of people? How much are they making in order to put this up and actually have take into consideration all of these lives? I mean, no matter what ethnicity, we're talking about ethnicities across the board. Forget all the poor people and all homeless people and the derelicts in the middle of the city right here taking advantage of Boston City Hospital, whatever they call it today. Okay? Forget all these people. But don't forget, you've got all of these other folks that are making money. And don't forget the millionaires and the little, you know, sedity brownstones down here in the South End. We got money up in here. Okay? And we have other money 10 miles out. Okay? I mean, you said Newton. Okay? You said Wellesley. All right? You said Cambridge. Okay? You're talking 10 miles out. This is not a bunch of little people that you can step on like a cigarette butt and forget about us. Okay? Every single person that you will annihilate when this thing does escape finally, because it most likely will, because it is so well publicized. The meeting wasn't publicized, but the facility has been. Everyone knows it's there. And when, like she said, put it on television for everyone to see how it's done, the intelligent people can pick apart, or they'll find another way to get in there and find exactly how to find what they need, or a way to get in, or whoever's at the head of what in order to get a job there, even if it's only cleaning the floors. And you don't have to be an immigrant to clean floors in a biolab. I mean, I know that that amount of money that they're going to be putting in is well worth someone's contract. You know, the contractors that are going to, I mean, people that are going to get the contract to clean that place, they're going to be making millions and millions. I know they will, because it's the kind of facility that you're getting, that you're talking about. Okay, so you don't have to get little uneducated immigrants to clean that lab, but you will be able to get anybody else that wants to do harm to us in there, anybody with a high intelligence level that knows what to do with these things. I don't know what to do. I'm just a RCC graduate, you know? Or, you know, I went to a few other colleges around. I went to BU, I went to Suffolk, you know. But, okay, I still wouldn't know what to do with that anthrax. And I was a bio major. I still wouldn't know what to do. Put it in the paper, I'll look at it. I wouldn't know I'd run from it, I know that. I have enough sense to know to get away from it. Okay, but the people okay, that are making this thing happen seem not to be aware, okay, that it is too much for us to actually settle for. You know, they absolutely, positively will have blood on their hands, without a doubt. It being in such I'm sorry for loss of words, I'm having a senior moment, but such a very detrimental area. First of all, you're looking at the public news every single night of all over the planet Earth. All over the planet Earth, you see, what are those car bombs?
Ma'am, I need you to wrap up your comments, please.
You see, oh, I will, thank you. You see car bombs. You see the people that drove into the thing. You see people doing sneaky stuff, sneaking in, sneaking out, doing this. You got people, what do you call that, shoplifters. I mean, will all of this inner city, you know, illegal whatever goes on here, a highly educated group of people could easily do horrible things to us with this facility being so close and so easy to access. And believe me, being where it is, you may think it's not easily accessible, but it can't help but be easily accessible. Please do not let them know that we, small amount of people, represent a larger amount and do not need it here, do not want it here, and how many people will die. Thank you.
Donna Martinez.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Donna Martinez, and I actually came out tonight. I received my first flyer about this event. I had been hearing about it through the news. The last big to-do I heard about it was the Brookline, when they were trying to put the site there. Then I heard that there was a plant. I thought it was a level 3 plant, and I guess that's what I'm hearing today. But I'm very uninformed about all of this, so all of the things that I've heard tonight, they're very disturbing for me. I came here because I thought that this was going to be a venue where there would be a hearing, and I've heard some disturbing comments about this not being a venue where people were feeling that they're being heard. So I would like to say to the people that are here representing this new biochemical site that they're planning on turning into a level 4 site, do you really hear, is the decision really made? And as for myself, I appreciate all the comments from everybody in this community. But I have to say, because I live in Roxbury and I have all of my life, my 2 children are here with me tonight. It may have been the wrong venue to bring them to, but they are here with me. I would like to say, how did you come about this without really informing the residents that the sites are closest to? And there's a lot of disparities in this area, health disparities, economic disparities, and I feel insulted because I feel as if the organizations that are in control of this event are actually not considering the people that are going to be most affected by it. That's my children, that's my family, that's all the people in my community, which is Roxbury where I live. I did not see a lot of people of color here today. So I wonder again, when people talk about racism, is it because you bank on ignorance, okay? And shame on you, because the only thing, I'm gonna make this short, I would ask every single one of you, if these were your kids, would you allow this biochemical plant to open up next to your home? Yes. No. And I doubt that very much. I doubt that very much. You don't live here. You don't live, that's right, you don't live here. So I would, but listen, now you're talking. Why? Because I touched you. Because I touched you. Because you know you're lying. No, nobody's talked to anybody in this room tonight. But I'm going to make it real for you, because that's what it is for everybody here. Everybody here does not have children. Everybody here has been very polite. That's bull. The politeness needs to go out the window. This is your community. There will be an accident. Probability? That's a bunch of crap, okay? There will be. Nobody's perfect. People are fallible. We live in a world where terrorism is real. I bet you there's a terrorist sitting in this room trying to figure out how they're going to get into that plant and cause some trouble. I do not. Are you going to teach me how to explain to my kids how to protect themselves if something does happen? Say yes to that, because then at least you'll be being honest. Thank you.
The final speaker of the evening will be this gentleman in the front row. I don't think I have your name on the list, so when you begin your comments, if you could state your name for the record, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. There's a mic right behind you if it's...
My name is Frank Bellotti. I've lived in Quincy and Roxbury and Dorchester and Cambridge for my life. I'm 60-something years old. But I was the manager of the facility, of the Baha'i Center across the street from the bio lab. 2000, all the way up to recently, I still am at the place taking care of the facility with some other people. And I've had 2 strokes in the course of the building of this facility, I guess. And I've never heard anyone say they were for the facility. Correct. And every time I've thought about the facility, I've thought how ridiculous it is to put a facility like this in a place like that. I mean, I would think that you would put a place like this in Nevada where they test nuclear, so, I mean, in a mountain, 5 or 6 flights down, so it can't hurt anyone. I mean, these Ebola, anthrax, the names I've heard. I heard a few other, 4 or 5 other names comparable to Ebola and anthrax. At the Baha'i Center, the Baha'i faith is a religion. We have a Sunday school for children, little kids, 5, 6 years, 7, 10 years old, across the street. No one's ever, I don't think, said it or notified them, but there's kids walking in and out of there all the time. And I'm always there, all hours of the day and night. There's trucks leaving that flower exchange and coming and going. To slip a truck in there full of explosives, it would be possible to do at any time. No one would notice anything. The fence is it's like a chain link fence. I mean, there's no way in the world that we should have the audacity to put something like that there for the people, for the children around here, for the next generation. I mean, is this something that's going to be open for 60 days? Or is it 60 years? Is it a research? I mean, what are we researching things like this for? We should be working for peace, not creating anthrax and other diseases we can't even control. We're creating things we can't control. How can we have the audacity to create and let loose in the environment something we can't even control. It's like you said, building a nuclear plant there, and we can't even control the waste. No, people talk about nuclear, we talk about it. No one ever mentions that the waste doesn't dissipate for thousands of years. What about the next generations? Who are we to do this? Do we have any response? Is there any formal response coming at the end of this? I haven't heard one person say anything in favor of this. Can you say something in favor of this? Or you just stand there and smile? And these other guys? I mean, it's a big joke, and then when you get out of here, then you just forget about it, go have a cup of coffee, and have a few laughs, and that's the end of it. I've been watching this for, it seems like 8 years anyway, but it might be 10, you're talking 10. But I've watched the building go up, and it is an absolute, it would have to be a person with rocks in their head that ever decided to put something like this right there, right in the heart of Boston, the crossroads of the city, the Mass Pike, everything right there. I mean, what is it? I mean, how can... I don't know what to say, really. I mean, I can't believe that you're doing it, or trying to do it. And I hope the resistance escalates. I really hope the resistance escalates. It will. I mean, it's got to. It's got to escalate. I mean, this has been very polite, like as you said. People are very. It's amazing it's gone this far. Like I said, I've been in comas twice, and come to, and my head's cleared out a bit, and I hear the meeting is still going on. I mean, it's an 8-story building, or whatever it is, a 6-story building. It isn't worth much money, really. There's a million other uses for it, or at least 100 other uses for it. It's right in the middle of a research area. I think 2 floors or 3 floors are committed to this use. There's plenty of things it can be used for.
Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up your comments. We need to vacate the building shortly.
Yeah. I'd like to wrap something else up. But it doesn't matter. I mean, whether I commented for an hour or I didn't come up here and comment, because no one listens anyway. And I'm really, really surprised at the patience of everyone. Really, I'm really surprised. I mean, I think you're playing with fire.
That concludes our public comment portion of the evening. I would like to reiterate that all of the comments that the public has given today will be responded to in the final supplementary risk assessment, as well as any comments that are submitted to us via our mailing address or our email address. There is a link there where you can also get a copy of the document if you have not gotten one yet. That is also the same information where you can send any of your comments. Again, the responses to those comments will appear in the final supplementary risk assessment.
Will there be a written transcript of this meeting?
This meeting will have a written transcript, yes.
Provided to the public?
Upon yeah, it'll be posted to the website.
A written transcript of this meeting will be posted to the website when?
When it is available.
And will that be available before the next?
Sir, I can't speak about when it'll be available or not. The meeting has just ended. I want to thank everyone for coming out this evening, and wish everyone to get home safely and have a good evening. Thank you again, and good night.